Hello, puppies and kittens. We're doing another hangout it's a celebratory hangout this time around. It's a little difficult to repair the house while it is currently on fire. We have to put the fire out, and I feel that we're doing that. I feel that the embers are just smoking now, and that it now may be time to start talking about what needs to be fixed and how we go about doing that. So I have a panel with me of secular activists who have obviously lived through the last 4 years in this country with us, and have always had issues that were still never addressed, and that maybe we have a chance to do some of them now. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Of course, my wife, Lilandra, you go first, please.
Hi, I co-host with Arn sometimes, and we and Arn do a lot of secular activism together. And we also wanted to talk about how the hangout on election night raised enough money for Austin Atheists helping the homeless to get them through the winter drive. And I'm going to pass it over to Phil to talk about that.
Hello. So, hi again, everybody. I'm Phil Session, and I do coordinate that group, the Austin Atheists Helping the Homeless. I'm also on the board of Recovering from Religion, and also on the board of Foundation Beyond Belief, and I'm the vice president of the Freethinkers Association of Central Texas down here in San Antonio. And so, even though my opinion said tonight will be of my own nature and not necessarily reflective of these organizations, of course, nonprofits and all that wonderful stuff. But yes, as Lily said, it was amazing. You couldn't really count as the podcast was going on, but the amount of money that was raised during just this last Tuesday, it was absolutely phenomenal. Blew past our goal, and so we are set, and we're now preparing with volunteers, and I'm talking to the other folks that help to coordinate that group as to how we're going to get all of these thermal items. So thermal underwear, gloves, hats, and socks are on the docket. We should have enough, given what we've raised before, to actually do multiple pairs of thermal socks, because as you might know, if you wear socks too often, they get dirty, smelly, crusty, etc. So to give a little bit more there, so we have a little bit of room to work with it. So it's super exciting, and thank you all so much for all of those contributions that you did. It was beyond anything that I could have imagined, and it's really awesome. So thank you all for that.
Yeah, and I'm going to move to the guy that just popped in. This is Political Science. You introduce yourself.
Okay. Can you hear me all?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This microphone sometimes goes crazy. So yeah, I'm Dr. Juhem Navarro-Rivera. I'm using the doctor now because Dr. Joel Biden is actually making news outlets call her doctor. With people with PhDs, we don't actually get that chance with news outlets. So I think it's a new era for us. And so I am a research consultant. I'm the managing partner of Socioanalytica Research. We do some polling and analysis for progressive organizations, and as part of the movement, I serve on the board of American Humanist Association, and I'm the co-chair of the Latinx Humanist Alliance. And I was one of the advisors for Nick, of the U.S. Secular Survey, among other projects that I don't recall right now. I am involved in too many things.
I got to read a super chat from RB Empathy, $20. Thank you very much for that. Biden 2020, nothing better than seeing your beautiful faces than on this victorious day. Thank you very, very much for that.
Yay.
All right, and the last guest we'll need to introduce, you might not have seen his face. He hasn't been doing much these last few years. What, Nick?
It's been very calm. Yeah, nothing really going on. I'm Nick Fish. I'm the president of American Atheists. I've been working in the atheist and secular community for about a decade now, as an activist and as a policy advocate, and a number of other positions. And before that, I actually worked on the 2008 presidential election down in North Carolina. So this is a simultaneously familiar feeling for me immediately after the election. And then the overwhelming sense that we have a lot of work to do is the next thing. So that's exactly what I'm feeling right now, and I just want to give that a moment to breathe, because that there's going to be a lot coming up. So just everybody hold on to your butts.
All right. So anybody have something you want to jump into first?
First, I would like to talk to Juhem. He analyzed the political habits of secular voters, and so he can put this in perspective for us. Juhem, how many seculars, which includes non-believers, atheists, agnostics, etc., are how do I say this without looking like too partisan? Are Democrats and Republicans?
So that depends. So right now, in October, Socioanalytica, my company, released the Secular Voices Survey, which in this case, the first Secular Voices Survey last year was actually only secular people. That was atheists, agnostics, nothing in particulars as the religious identification. This time it was a national survey and with a large subsample of non-religious folk. The partisan divide was essentially like majority Democrats. I don't remember the exact number, maybe 55, 54%, about 23% Republican, and then you had about the rest of independent third party. We did actually ask a horse race question in that survey that had a split of 68 to 30. So 68 for Biden-Harris, 30% for Trump-Pence. And I've been looking at the exit polls that I have seen, and these are preliminary exit polls. I haven't seen the knowns number, like the breakdowns I've seen in the New York Times and CNN only gives you the born again white Christians. But AP has the AP Votecast, which they started doing the previous cycle. And it's a much larger survey than the exit polls, actually. It has about 100,000 people. And it had a break of 72 to 20 seats. So it's kind of like the same range, not just the same range of the survey of the Secular Voices survey, but slightly higher than the exit polls have had. Probably Obama was the only one who got like 75% in 2008 in the exit polls, but certainly the same range of about 3 to 1, the secular vote for 3 to 2 to 1, depending on the year. So yeah, that has been the breakdown of secular partisanship. So secular voters, not religious voters, are generally more on the Democratic side, but there's a bunch of independents. So there's a lot of work to do by the political parties, of a lot of independents who may vote Democrat, but they necessarily don't like the Democratic Party, as you see when you ask about either trust or favorability of the political parties.
Yeah, I got to jump in to read a couple of these super chats. First of all, Great Big Rands, $2. Let's hope I don't get drunk this time. An important message here. I'm not even going to ask what everybody's drinking. And Evelyn, 10 pounds, says, accidentally called you Austin and not Phil last time, like a silly UK person I am, and wanted to correct myself while giving me a good excuse to support y'all fabulous peeps again.
I appreciate that, Evelyn.
Yep. And then I'm looking for what I don't like the way this thing scrolls, and it causes me to lose some of these. Here we go. Marty Mad Scientist, Canadian, $4. Thank you very much for that. And I'm missing one more. Am I? Nope. I got him. All right. There's one. Let's do a Control Z for the last 4 years of Trump from Mick Hannibal, $5. Okay, so on that note,
did you get this one?
I'm sorry, what?
This last one.
Oh, and Phil Stiffs. This was a long, hard-fought victory, but it's not over yet. Keep fighting the good fight, RN friends. Yeah, it's interesting that this was record numbers, and it was still this close. That we had more people voting early than voted before in the previous election. At all. I mean, so just think about the ridiculous turnout, and yet it's still a razor-thin lead. That's disturbing, and the reason, obviously, is all of the negative press that has been all over. Look at what Fox News sees. I mean, anytime you look at Fox News, they're saying they can't say that, you know, people on the left, they can't give specific people and talk about specific things. They have to demonize everybody by saying radical leftists, right? And then we always have to be demon rats with a communist agenda, you know. And that's when they're not calling us cannibalistic pedophiles. And this is just all over the media.
This comment I thought was interesting in the context of what you're talking about, but I want to get back to who the nuns are, and et cetera, politically. And Catalyst says, y'all are counting pre-hatched eggs. The media doesn't have authority to declare the president-elect. Trump is taking this to court. It's not over. Dewey defeats Truman. You remember that. Y'all remember that.
I don't remember that because I wasn't born. Like, I have read about it.
I don't think any of us were alive back then. I don't want to presume. Phil looks great for his age, but I don't think we're talking that old. So, but listen, the idea that Donald Trump is going to go to court and get thrown out anywhere near the number of votes, and that's what we're talking about here, throwing out votes of the American people, is simply ridiculous. It's not going to happen. Republicans in Congress that are enabling this fantasy land are doing a profound disservice to the American people and to our democracy by enabling this type of wish casting and this conspiratorial thinking. What we need right now is for people to look at math, understand facts, and look at where we're going. We're still counting mail-in ballots in Pennsylvania. We're counting mail-in ballots that arrived before Election Day, by the way. None of the ballots that, you know, Donald Trump is talking about, claiming without evidence that they're mixing in things from after Election Day or that they're making up. None of that is true. And by the time the votes that are completely uncontested are counted, Joe Biden is probably going to have a margin of, 65, 75, 100,000 votes. That's not a vote total that gets thrown out in court. It just does not happen. If you were alive or you remember the year 2000 when this happened with George Bush, we were talking about a margin before the Supreme Court stopped the recount. We were talking about a margin of about 1,000 votes. That's it. Out of I don't remember the exact number, but millions and millions and millions of votes cast. We ended with something like 530 votes being the margin between Al Gore and George W. Bush in Florida. Now, I mean, this speaks to, by the way, to the insanity of our entire system, where we know already that Joe Biden has won by at least 4 million votes, and that range is going to continue to expand. And yet we were waiting on, Maricopa County to drop ballots, or we were waiting on Clark County in Nevada to drop votes, or we were waiting for Delaware County in Pennsylvania, to count veteran votes. Like, that's crazy. It's the system, but it's crazy. And so
and
the idea that there's any amount of fraud here that's going to throw this out is just complete insanity. So get that out of your mind. Prepare yourselves.
I think it's important to point that out too, because we want a peaceful transfer of power. And this is the first time in my life as somebody who's 50 years old that I'm not sure that that's going to happen. And so like saying that it's fraud or pushing conspiracy theories, you're gonna have a lot more people resentful and perhaps ready to, like they're doing now. They're outside of vote counting places, causing a ruckus, I guess, if you want to put it in American terms. But but the Dewey defeats Truman. This is way before the internet's children, when we just had newspapers, and there's a picture in history books of Dewey holding up a Dewey defeats Truman from, I don't remember which newspaper it was, and he didn't win. But I don't think the analogy is going to hold up here.
I need to read some more of these real quick. Alexandra Lynn Poyser, $10. I'm glad the fascist is out of office. We need to put secular judges in the courts and protect the First Amendment. We will be talking about that momentarily. Let me get to the next one. This is, what is this? Terrar. Oh, I'm not even going to do. Juhem, how do you read that?
Why should I?
Your eyes are better, presumably.
I'm hoping you can roll an R easier than I can.
Tirara de quello, but it may be de cuello.
Okay,
because,
$10.
I doubt that these like handles special characters.
Okay, so huge fan, RN Raw. Please don't give up. We fight for those who don't have a voice. Thank you very much. It is a perfect sentiment. And then there was another couple of them. Here we go. There we go. This is Jacqueline Richards, 1999 super sticker. Thank you very much for that, Jacqueline. And then Catless Godman. Okay, 134, 400. What is that? What is that currency?
I don't know what that currency is. Oh,
that's from India. So it's I forgot the name of the Indian currency.
Let's take a look.
God bless America and may God protect the church. Joe Biden. What are your thoughts on church-state separation under Joe Biden? Love from India. Thank you for that. Okay, so now we answered that question. We're going to talk about the Joe Biden thing on the church in a moment because there are people in the chat who were saying that now.
I mean, that's the answer. That's not what he said. He said God protect the troops, just so we're clear.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay. And then there's another couple of them. I think the only thing humans are equal in is death. $5 decided to use money for good for once. RN Raw all the way. Thank you very much for that. Another here. RB Empathy $10. Sorry, I made an error the last chat. I may be buzzed. You're on your way. Now may be the time to remind the Trumpist trolls in the chat that Biden at least believes in science in comparison to COVID is a cold Trump. Yeah, well, got you there. Okay, and I think that was it. We can continue. Who was picking up? Was it Nick?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the American Atheist Secular Survey. Also, you surveyed what seculars are interested in policy-wise.
Yeah, that's right. And so our secular survey, just to be clear, I know UM's survey is more representative and looks better at demographics than ours. Ours was a convenience sample, but it does get to sort of relative experiences within the community and relative preferences. The one thing that we did look at that I think is notable for the moment and moving forward is the policy preferences of non-religious people and the things that they indicated they wanted secular activists to focus on. The thing that for us was the most interesting is just the overwhelming number of people that were really concerned with and wanted us to fight to protect secular public education. You can get the full summary and actually in the full report at secularsurvey.org. But that's certainly a major issue. The next one was opposing religious exemptions that allow discrimination. This is a key issue for us right now, a Supreme Court case just earlier this week, Fulton versus Philadelphia. And then the other ones kind of in that top tranche of issue concerns were access to abortion and contraception, stopping illegal political activity by churches, and actually protecting the environment and addressing climate change. We're the sort of top 5 or 6 there. The one, that people have this misconception about our community or this idea about our community, that the only thing that people care about is things like, getting religious displays off public land. That was literally the lowest ranked one. And it was actually, there's a big gap between that one and the next group. So it's certainly not, pardon the expression, a monolith, which I suppose is the appropriate term to use.
I've been hearing that for a while this week.
Yeah, and so the watchword of any person who does surveying, right, is, well, it's not a monolith, but so that's, but as far as like issues that people are concerned about, I mean, it's basically a list of things that the Trump administration has attacked over the last 4 years. Secular public education, religious exemptions that jeopardize people's access to services, undermining healthcare access and abortion and contraception, and religious exemptions that jeopardize the civil rights of LGBTQ Americans, religious minorities, and so on. So it's kind of a who's who of the things that we need to look at. The community is right in line with the reality of what the Trump administration has done over the last few years as far as their policy agenda. So
I got to read another one. Outraged Empathy, $20. The threat of theocracy is still real. I'll stay in the fight. Thank you very much for that. And then Big Dog, $1. Thank you very much. And there was one, there we go, James Hogue, $5. Sorry that you had to experience that Nathan thing yesterday, but at least there's good news today and something to look forward to. They're talking about a debate I had yesterday with a flat earther. I said that the conditions, I said I would not debate a flat earther unless he showed up with a model and a map. He had neither. and could not explain anything about his own position. Matter of fact, he said that the sun and moon were not physical. So anyway,
Okay.
I said they're either made of matter and energy, or they're made of imagination, like your God. So which is it? So the Butcher, $5. That was a real speech by real leadership, breath of fresh air. And I want to comment on that because it was the presentation that Joe Biden had just done was about including people. It was a message of love. It was a message of healing. It was absolutely couldn't be any more different than what we've been listening to of the rampant hateful raving of the last 4 years.
I think that's interesting that maybe our policies, for the most part, like which one was number one?
Protecting secular public education.
Interesting. And how are we going to do that with the new composition of the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, and this is the challenge. So there's the courts are not going to be fixed magically overnight. We have at least six justices on the Supreme Court right now that think that it's completely appropriate for something like what happened in Espinoza versus Montana, which was the case allowing the direct funding of religious schools by state governments, and not just allowing, but potentially mandating that funding if a program exists that gives money to secular schools. Their position is that they also have to do the same thing with religious schools, which is completely out of step with decades, generations, 100 years, 150 years of legal precedent in this country. And the decision itself is such just a who does everybody here know Calvin and Hobbes? This is some like Calvin ball stuff where the rules were just kind of made up as we went. So we don't actually know yet what the implications of Espinoza are going to be. But the fact is that the federal government has immense power through the administrative process, through regulatory agencies, through, in this case, the Department of Education. So having someone who is not a raving theocrat committed to gutting public education and literally taking money out of public schools and redirecting it to religious schools like Betsy DeVos, having someone in that position as Secretary of Education will make a difference immediately. And it's not just funding, it's exempting those schools from requirements that they serve all students, exempting them from requirements that they, teach facts or teach anything other than religious education, or that they don't discriminate in their hiring and firing practices. I mean, that's another issue that came before the Supreme Court where, it didn't go our way, but there are rules that can be put in place to sort of lock this down and to not just, prevent intrusions from religious private schools, but to enhance, to build better our public school system and invest in our public school system so that every kid in America has a better chance at, a great public education, something that is, a really important cornerstone of American democracy, and invest in that. And I think it's, key that, and it's notable that Jill Biden, Dr. Biden, is a teacher and is somebody who is taught in community college. I'm the son of a teacher, and I understand the importance of having teachers as part of this system. Somebody like Betsy DeVos had literally never taught in her life, had never had a kid in public schools, had never gone to public schools, and this is who was in charge of administering public education in our country. Right. And that's bonkers. And so having personnel is policy. And so regardless of your individual feelings about Joe Biden, the fact that Joe Biden has committed to appointing somebody who has taught and has connections to teachers to lead the Department of Education means that there will be a difference in policy and that public education will be supported. Now, the thing that people need to know is education policy is a very local thing. And so I hope people will, get involved at the local level. This is a great opportunity for people.
On that, what are the chances, do you think, of Dr. Biden's administration of giving American Atheists and secular organizations an audience?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we had with the Obama administration, but we were completely shut out of when the Trump administration came in. The Obama administration went to great lengths to ensure that atheists and secular people were heard and had a seat at the table for these policy discussions. I hope that continues with the Biden administration. I have no reason to doubt that it would. The Humanists for Biden were included as part of the official campaign. Again, American Atheists does not endorse candidates, but we certainly work on policy and want to make sure that atheists have a voice in that discourse. So,
here's a relevant super chat. Dan Moser, $5. How do we combat false information, ALA, info wars without harming free speech?
I mean, even just the prospect of pushing for courses, even in school age. Like, I mean, you never had a course, well, most people never had a course around critical thinking, for example, being able to push for, a class like that. I mean, even on the Department of Education level, as Nick said, education is primarily local and state. That's where a lot of the policies, your different curricula, what's required by teachers to teach and everything else. But the Department of Education can encourage the placement of properties. I mean, a policy, should I say, like Betsy DeVos and her rhetoric, taking money away from public schools, direct them to charter schools and religious schools and everywhere else, with the exception of places that really need it in order to, lift people out of their current situations, lift people out of poverty, and get them onto some basic, socioeconomic plane to lift that entire plane up. But in any case, but yeah, I think that I lost my whole point.
I will jump in there. Marty, mad scientist, Canadian $5. Thank you very much. Reality has a bad habit of dispelling incorrect beliefs very dramatically and somewhat critically. Real things kill you, unreal things don't. And then another one following after that, MEM, $24.99. I really feel like I can breathe again. Maybe the world stands a chance. I greatly appreciate that you do. It truly makes a difference. Thank you very much for that. I know that a number of people are wondering how we can be more politically active, because we want to take, we think that there's a chance that the world might be listening now, and that maybe progressive people and others that have an interest can have an effect. I myself have found that the more that I do, the more it seems that I can do. So for all of the activists here, what would you suggest to any of these people if they have a passion and interest, they want to get involved, they want to get their voices heard, they want to be involved in the political situation? What do they do?
Yeah, I would say, one of the things that it's kind of funny because people call me an activist and I don't feel like I am one, but people keep calling me that. I'm just a nerd. But one of the things that I've been talking about with a lot of friends lately, I live in the DC area, so right now this looks like the forest moon of Endor. We just need Ewoks dancing in the streets, but literally, like, I can hear fireworks from my apartment, like literally, and like I have friends like texting me and talking to me, and in the sense of becoming more active, for the last few years, like one of my main clients in my company has been Alicia Garza, the organization is founded by Alicia Garza, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter, and she has been such a great example to me, just in the case that I don't know if it's because I'm a political scientist and I just always think in the worst case scenario for things, and I just go there immediately. But just seeing her positivity and how hard she works every day and how hard so many people have been working. I got really insulted the other day when Florida was cold, and then like I got people texting me about like dumping Florida, and I work with a lot of people who work trying to flip Florida, and it was just an insult to a lot of people who have been working really hard. Just because something didn't happen doesn't mean that nobody tried. And I think you shouldn't be, you shouldn't feel like, I think you should take a subject that you're passionate about. Like Nick said, like education is a very local issue. And if you can get involved in your board of education, like those are decided like, with very low voter turnout. You can organize a bunch of friends and like trying to run a slate or even create, get a voting block and unofficially kind of like endorse someone. Organize, like if your local group can organize like candidate forums and see like who actually goes there and who actually stands with you and who actually is willing to answer your questions. I think that's a good way if you don't want to run for office yourself, which is, especially in this country, so little ask, because it does, even at lower levels, it actually costs a little money to do that.
I got to jump in again.
Sure.
Pattern Machine 666. Thank you very much. $6.66. Thank you much. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. We've heard that many times before. Not sure how it relates to what Juhem is saying now.
I think that was referring to the combating misinformation.
True enough.
I think it was more referring to that side of things. But
yeah, to finish, no, sorry.
Yeah, go forward, Juhem.
To finish the thought, I think we need to find issues and subjects that passionate us, that we're willing. I mean, elections decide things, and they may improve some things at some level. But I mean, some of these fights go on and on and on until, like, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And so you have to focus on issues that you care about, issues that you are willing to put like months and maybe years of your time. I mean, I know activists who have been working on 20 years on issues. And yeah, like, you got to follow your passions and don't be disappointed. Like, you're not going to win at the first, probably not at the second, but eventually you will see either people moving to your side or seeing like some change in the winds, and it could happen really quickly.
I got to tell you that you said you were hearing fireworks down the street. I live in the suburbs, and somebody's having I'm hearing very loud what sounds like Frank Sinatra. But it's that type of music, and it's like, I don't know, there are people waltzing in one of the houses in my neighborhood.
But I definitely say on that side for folks getting involved, because not everyone, as you have said, is cut out for that public office life, having scrutiny and the money, the barrier, that those artificial barriers that are there to get in. And so, what I would suggest is empower yourselves. Like, a lot of people are passionate about issues, but are not necessarily comfortable talking with their legislator, or don't know the best way to go about confronting them and actually trying to have a meaningful conversation with your representative to try to change their mind in the first place. And so I did want to do a small plug for the Secular Coalition for America, for that. They have come to San Antonio and spoke with FACT before to talk with us about how we can get better involved here, and gave some tools. And so if you look them up, look at their directions, they have of course you can sign up and all that other kind of stuff, but they go over some of the issues and give you kind of a way to talk about issues. So a part of that presentation was, how do you talk about something like science-based education in your local schools with regards to sexual education, or whatever the subject is you're trying to address, without saying something that makes them raise their defense barriers up very early in the conversation about how to approach those kinds of conversations. And so you may want to look them up to just empower yourself to do that. And as Juhem said, you may be disappointed, or you may get one of those form letters and say, well, thank you so much, Representative so-and-so thanks you for stopping by. And, one of those things, of course, but, keeping at it and actually empowering yourself to actually have those conversations, and try to get other folks to also be willing to take that step to go down there to the state house if you're able to, post COVID or whatever. And
to my experience, when people ask the question, what could I do? Well, when you start to do something, you find out that there's a lot more you could do than you ever would have thought of. I mean, and I think all of us here are doing that same thing. I got to read another chat. This is Fred Harvey, Australian $5. Don't get me wrong. I hope Biden has won, but have results been officially certified? Are you sure you've won? Juhem, what do you think are the option? What is the option that Trump has at this point? Anything? Because I'm still
by the military, which apparently it's out of the table right now.
I'm still
that's the
getting
only-
email
that's
from the
the only
Trump
thing. I mean,
campaign.
Nick is the lawyer, and I.
No,
You're not a lawyer? I always thought you were a lawyer. Okay,
No.
so we have no lawyers in here. Sorry.
he plays one on TV.
Yeah,
He just plays
I'm
one on
in
TV.
proximity to lawyers, so
Okay.
Okay, so I just want to know that
narrow area of the law.
I'm still getting emails. I got an email an hour ago
Mhm.
from the Trump campaign saying we're winning.
Yeah, no, and so here's the deal with certifying the election. So every state will put out uncertified or unofficial results, and those are the live counts that folks like the Associated Press and the Decision Desk and all the news outlets will plug into. Those are unofficial. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't have all the votes. It just means that there are certain processes that the boards of election all throughout the country, and the thing you have to remember about this is all elections are administered at the state level. There are not uniform processes that people go through in all 50 states. Some states, by the way, are even administered at the county or the township level. So we're not talking even of 52 different options here. We're talking about thousands of different jurisdictions that have different requirements about how this process works. Now, there are deadlines for when those certification results. And so what happens eventually is the states will officially certify and say, okay, these are our final vote totals. We've gone through all the audits, and they do that, by the way. They go through audits. They'll pick out, there are certain states like, I think it's Nevada, literally has like this box of all the different precincts and counties, because Nevada only has like 11 counties or something. And they pull out randomly little cards that say, okay, these are the precincts. These are the voting places we're going to audit and go through and take a look and make sure that, you know, the count on the machine matches the count in the summary, matches all, and they do that anyway, but they just do it again to double check. And the thing that people really need to understand here is that for so many of these local elections officials, this is like what they do. They live for this. They are committed, dedicated public officials who are oftentimes not partisan at all, who what they go to work to do every day is to make sure that everybody can vote, that as many people can vote as possible, that the laws are followed, and they want to be completely above reproach. And they go way out of their way to make sure that happens. And so, you know, the Trump campaign whining about observers not being allowed in, it's made up. They were allowed in. They were required to stand like 12 feet away or 20 feet away, and then they had a court order that they had to be 6 feet away, and they called that a huge victory. There are hundreds of ballot watchers, poll watchers in these counting locations all the time. And so, you know, it's completely made up that they were shut out or that any of that stuff. But it doesn't mean that you can just show up and get your phone out and start recording people counting ballots, because guess what? The ballots have people's addresses on them and they have people's votes. So you can't record in there and then say, aha, you know, I'm shining a spotlight on this. We're going to get some transparency. It's like there's already transparency built into the system. But the answer to the ultimate question of when are things certified, the numbers vary. There are a few states that require certification within a week of the election. The majority of states require certification sometime before the end of November. And then there are a few states, like 15 or so, that allow certification through December, but before the Electoral College meets, obviously. But these results are not going to change, as I said, sort of at the top of the show.
I got to read this real quick. Mikkel Mawinkel, this is Norwegian kroners, 50 Norwegian kroner. There was one disaster in this election, however. Mitch McConnell was reelected. No man has done more to promote government dysfunction in living memory. Yes, you're correct. I'm stunned at this because McConnell bragged early on in the Obama administration. He bragged that he would, in advance, he was going to block everything Obama ever tried to do. And that he bragged at the end that he stopped Obama from being able to appoint any justices, that he blocked like hundreds of justices that he could then pass over to Trump, so that the right-wing conservatives and the religious right and all of that could get their judges in, but Obama was denied. And Trump, Mitch McConnell bragged about doing this and even laughed, the perfect villain laugh, that he had done this to obstruct justice.
I wanted to make a quick point that we need to be realistic about what we can accomplish and what we can't. Sometimes we live in Texas and we have the Texas school board, which is famous for being anti-science, and you would think that would be very discouraging to go testify during a curriculum hearing, but they see atheists show up and they think, well, if we do this, if we push this, maybe we'll get a lawsuit or something. And that's kind of one of the stereotypical ways that atheist organizations deal with things, is with lawsuits. And I almost wonder too, realistically, if we push things through lawsuits, if it goes up the pipeline, with so many Trump appointments and so many the Supreme Court being what it is, how far we're going to get with that anymore. But don't be discouraged in whatever state you're in to not go testify and not let your voice get heard. It does work sometimes, even in places where you think it's not going to.
Yeah, I got to read another couple of them. Tilden Peacock for $5, since both major parties don't seem concerned about SOCAS. And believe it or not, I don't know what SOCAS is at the top of my head. What is the possibility in y'all's minds about a secular party being a viable third party? And before we jump to that one, I have to read this one too. Pteranodon Media, $5.12, hails from San Marcos, Texas. FYI, today happens to be a good day to listen to Hulk Hogan's Real American theme on full blast outside a Trump rally. Okay, now on to the previous question. And I lost the previous question.
Yeah, no, I know the previous question. I was like,
okay.
There you go. There hasn't been a viable third party since the Republican Party was founded in 1852. That was the last viable third party in American history. I mean, it's really hard to first, I remember when I was a kid that people were complaining that why Black Americans don't found their own political party. Well, Black Americans are about 13% of the adult population. Secular people are 26 to 31, depending on what survey you believe, and not all of them are
a monolith.
Yeah, we're not a monolith. I mean, Latinos.
Yeah,
we're not a monolith. People remember that. I mean, finally learned that lesson this week. And no, there's many factors why the United States is a two-party system, right? We have elections that in most states are winner take all. So you run in a district, whoever wins, regardless of how you win, that's the person who represents us. There's no proportional representation, which is systems that actually encourage the creation of more political parties. Now, there's what's happening right now. It's that several states, primarily Maine, it's kind of the biggest example are implementing instant runoff voting, which means that you rank your candidates, and essentially, if none of the top two candidates reach a majority of the vote, that means 50%. That means that the preference of the top two candidates, the preference of the people who didn't win, who didn't choose those top two candidates, are selected the second, third choice, depending how many rounds you need to go until somebody gets a majority of the vote.
Yeah, just to highlight that, I mean, we were talking about different states use different means to determine their candidate. Most people are aware that, Minnesota was using Thunderdome, and that's how Jesse Ventura became their government.
A fight to the death. It's similar in California. In my understanding, that's why Arnold Schwarzenegger was so successful. But yeah. I mean, this is one of the first things you learn studying political science, as the doc can confirm. When you have first past the post systems, you tend to end up with two-party systems. That's just, there aren't a lot of laws in political science, and that's one of them, right?
Yeah, and there are exceptions. Canada has 3 functional political parties, but one is a local political party that it's. But other than that, even England, that has technically 3 kind of parties. Labour had replaced the Liberals over time,
right?
So it's not. And again, this is a place where local level can be very important. The Working Families Party, for example, has been a very good progressive force in places like New York. In Connecticut, where I lived many years, it has had actual active representation in a few city councils for over a decade.
Yeah.
So there are ways in which you can do this, but certainly not a national political party to organize. I mean, the Greens and Libertarians haven't done it, and they have been around for a longer time. And there's also the ballot, especially at the presidential level. Like, presidential candidates have to apply to be on the ballot on every state. So it's not a national ballot that you get in. So essentially, ballot access laws differ by state. So it's really hard to organize a national political party. And also what it means to have a third party. The third party means something else to everybody who wants a third party. And I have a really great example from the Puerto Rico election that was actually this week. So in Puerto Rico, if you don't know, last year we were able to kick out the governor. He resigned in disgrace. He's living in Virginia. I haven't visited him. And so the person who replaced him, who was the attorney general, essentially, ran for her full term in the party primary. She lost. And so the person of that political party, the pro-statehood party, is actually now the governor-elect, or at least is ahead. But he's winning by 32% of the vote. He's winning 32%. The second largest party is winning by 31%. And then there are 4 candidates that have 35% of the vote. So in Puerto Rico, you have 4 minor political parties, actually 3 minor political parties and 1 independent candidate who actually have more votes than the 2 main parties, the 2 historically main parties. So a lot of people were united in not wanting these 2 parties because there's been a lot of problems with them over the last 50 years, but everybody had a different idea of what they want that third party to be.
So I got to read a couple more of these. ZQ's $10. Even though Biden is a Catholic, the second after JFK, is there a chance the damage done to the Johnson Amendment can be undone if Republicans hold the Senate? Well, jump back to that because I've got to read a couple more. This one, Vash Lancet, $5. Here you go. I finally catch you live. May this buy you a beer? Thank you very much. Yes, it may. And then DCXXXX, $20. From a salty-tiered atheist Trump voter. Cognitive dissonance is a hell of a drug. Please continue your unmatched science videos. Thank you very much for that.
So is he saying that he's on cognitive dissonance?
I would have to guess. But he's got some reality there because he's salty-tiered. So
could be talking about us saying that we're being cognitively dissonant.
Well, then that was just
that's my assumption.
Yeah, that was my assumption, but I don't know.
Well, for me, not saying that atheists have to be Republicans or Democrats per se, but with the Trump administration, your priorities could not have been secularism as an atheist. Yeah. As much giveaways as he gave to evangelicals, we had Betsy DeVos, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and what? Look at the vice president, for example. I mean, Trump did everything he could to undermine secular values. He wanted to every provision of the First Amendment, for example, Congress shall make no law even respecting an establishment of religion, but Trump wanted to establish Christianity as the state religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Trump wanted to establish a Muslim ban, right? And then, or abridging freedom of speech or of the press. But Trump wanted to be able to sue anybody that criticized him, and he said that the press were the enemies of the people. It goes on and on. Trump was against the Constitution all the way through, and so it's amazing to me that anybody could be atheist and vote so far against their own interests as to vote for Trump.
Unless you're a white supremacist.
Well,
he wanted
Go ahead, Phil. Sorry. Go ahead, Phil.
I was about to say, Trump wanted to, he said explicitly in one of his, rambling speeches as he does, that he wanted churches to be able to preach a political preference, from the pulpit. Churches in particular, he didn't widen it to say oh yes, all nonprofits should be able to do something like this. It was specifically talking about churches because that is exactly who he was trying to appease. He wasn't worried about other folks as well. I'm not sure if I'd ever heard him talking about something that would benefit American atheists in that way. They should be able to do something like that. It was nothing along those lines. So
that's
a lot.
The problem with so much of the rhetoric here from the Trump administration, from people that are supportive of that, is it's not about religious freedom. It's about religious supremacy. It's about the supremacy of a very particular type of religion. And so this is the problem with Christian nationalists. When you ask them, well, what do you mean by America's a Christian nation? They mean, the Christianity of Robert Jeffress or Jerry Falwell Jr., which if it's Jerry Falwell Jr., that's sort of a weird, like off in the corner staring at things type of Christianity that I don't know that we are. This is a family show, so we probably shouldn't go into that too far. They certainly don't mean, the Christianity of Reverend Dr. William Barber or Al Sharpton, or Al Sharpton, right? They don't mean the Christianity of Black liberation preachers or of normcore Protestants. That's not what they mean. They mean this very particular type of hard right, anti-abortion, pro-white supremacy, slaveholder religion that you can trace literally back from the anti-abortion movement to the Jim Crow era to the pro-slavery. Like, it's a direct path. And one thing, there's a super chat, I'll let you read it. I mentioned this earlier. Joe Biden closes his speech with "protect our troops," not "protect the church." I've seen this multiple times now in the chat. I don't know where that's coming from. I know some people misheard the speech, but he says "protect our troops." Yes, I wish he ended with something different, but it's not "protect the church." Just so just so we're 100% clear on that. So,
if I remember correctly, he did say something toward the end about something along the lines of "God bless America."
Yeah, well, he always ends with God bless America and God bless our troops.
And this was from Talon Fitch, $4.99. Thank you very much for that. But continue, please.
And I wanted to dip back briefly to the question about a third party, a secular party. What the other my two colleagues here were saying about, well, what does that actually mean? Like the devil's in the details on all of this. One of the ways that you can do this is by changing your political system and the way that you elect people. We just had an election, or they just had an election in New Zealand. New Zealand uses an electoral system called mixed member proportional, where they still elect a person from a district, but then they also pick which party they want. And that proportion of the party vote pulls people from what's called a list vote, where people parties add people to a list, and you get extra seats, and you can pull people from that list to fill the rest of your seats. That's
Majestic Beck. I'm sorry, I
That's
didn't mean to cut you off.
This is a system that's not just New Zealand. This is something that is used in Germany for the Bundestag. Same thing, and it does lead to a more diverse, set of parties. But it's funny when you look at the outcomes. Largely, you end up with two like dominant parties, and they may not get a majority. Like neither one may get a majority. You end up with two pretty big parties, and then a bunch of smaller ones. That's just kind of what happens because parties run on coalitions. And so you find kind of natural seams in the political discourse to build a coalition. And that's exactly what happens here in the United States. It just happens in a more formal way. So you might end up with, something like a Labor Party plus the Greens. We do have a Green Party, but and then, something like the Lib Dems in the UK, like that would end up being what the Democratic Party is here in the United States versus in the UK, you have something like the Conservatives and UKIP and these other like the Unionist Party from Northern Ireland, sort of social conservative parties, along with business-friendly parties and whatever. That's all merged in a more formal alliance made with the Republican Party. Like that's just what happens.
I have to read
the system. Make a different system. But just creating the party, it's not really going to do a whole lot. Sorry.
Majestic Beck, Canadian $20. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Educating your children with factual curriculum and not religious dogma will allow them to make informed decisions and not be misled by fake news or the lies of radicals. This may go a long way. This may go along in becoming a secular society. Yes, I agree with that.
The devil's in the details there. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation on the internet, and so it's really hard as a teacher. Like even working with other teachers, I've had teachers that use social studies to promote Christianity. So you could come up with some standards for critical thinking, and there are even in Texas standards, but getting curriculum and getting people to administer it is where you're going to struggle some in our country.
And this is especially true right now, and this is something that we actually found is bad curricula is making its way into online education right now because the public school system was not set up for distance learning. So much of the curriculum is predicated on the idea that you're going to be in a classroom with 30-ish kids for an hour at a time, 5 days a week. And, that's what it was made on. And all this digital stuff, all this online stuff, all this distance learning stuff, there just didn't exist a public school curriculum for lessons to teach the stuff that's required under the curriculum. And so what did exist was a lot of homeschooling and distance learning materials and online materials for religious schools. And so they found the stuff that wasn't like, teaching creationism, but, was sort of passable, I guess, and plugged it in to some of these public schools, but didn't run through line by line and make sure that everything was kosher, pardon the expression. And some of it was injecting like weirdly religious stuff into places where it didn't belong. We found an 8th grade history curriculum that included like a weird focus on certain tribes of Israel, ancient tribes of Israel in an 8th grade history class. And, questions about, imagine how God would have felt creating life, the first time. What would it have felt like to make life and sculpt an animal and say what it would feel like to create that from nothing? Like that was part of an elementary school curriculum. And we kind of said, hey, wait a second here. This is what?
Animals don't come from nothing.
No, you were sculpted from clay. Come on, we know.
Multicellular life.
I apologize that I have to keep I apologize that I have to keep interrupting with the flow, but I have to read these. Ice-eyed Queen, $5. I know it's irrelevant to 99% of the country. However, I'm a transsexual woman who is numb right now. I am still scared. 10 years, and it's hell. I wish I could say that things are going to be better. I hope that they are. I would have reason to believe that they are. I think.
Like I would at least hope, like some of the demonization, like even for those that are trans serving in the military, that can be rectified. That type of thing. And but it's a much larger conversation to talk about, and it would be wonderful to have even things like comprehensive sex ed actually talking about and normalizing the different orientations and gender identities in the development stages of our youth growing up, because the longer we have this youth going by that doesn't have that exposure and they're just like, oh, I don't understand this, versus if they get to know that, hey, this is a normal thing that we're seeing in the world. These are people that are just like you, that are just around you, that are your friends and neighbors, and it's nothing to be shocked and awed about. This is just a normal course of life, and here's something you should know, to normalize
I would
that.
hope that there's some good things going to happen with the Biden presidency for trans rights, such as I believe Trump had an executive order that trans are not a protected class because it says you can't discriminate based on sex, and they interpreted that to mean that did not include trans people. And I've already seen places that say that like online, where if you're looking for a place to live, does this place have anti-discrimination against the LGB part, and it'll say yes, and then trans no. So I'm not going to say that that I'm hoping things will be better, but nobody should be discriminated against trying to find a place to live, trying to get a job, especially not in federal things.
Well, and this
don't pay taxes.
Right. And so this interpretation of the law is something that the Trump administration tried to rush through largely in the Department of Health and Human Services. This was a directive that came down from their Office of Civil Rights, which is always a really perverse thing that it's like Roger, the guy who ran that office was named Roger Severino, and he's from Alliance Defending Freedom, and is just a right-wing, anti-trans in particular, but anti-LGB as well, bigot, who had no place being anywhere near the Office of Civil Rights, and he was in charge of civil rights policy for HHS. And they flipped it around and said, all right, if you're being discriminated against because you're trans, well, okay, we're not going to take those cases. We're not going to deal with that. But if you're religious, if you're a religious healthcare provider and your employer tries to make you do something that is against your religious faith, like, dispense, if you're a pharmacist, dispense a legally prescribed prescription for birth control, and you don't want to do it, but they tell you have to, you can file a civil rights complaint in HHS to fight this. And like that's crazy. But I don't want to sugarcoat this and pretend that this is all fixed, because we did have a Supreme Court case that did address this on the federal level. So we had the Zerba case, Altitude Express versus Zerba, and the Harris Funeral Homes, the Amy Stevens case from Michigan, Harris Funeral Homes versus EEOC, which said that gender identity and sexual orientation are protected under the equal under that title of the Civil Rights Act. And so, at the federal level, that type of discrimination law, those existing discrimination laws do protect people. But people have to remember that those employment protections only exist for businesses with more than 25 people, and they're not absolute. And so states have to step in and do more. Now, in Alabama, the first pre-filed bill for the Alabama state legislature, pre-filing is where they submit a bill ahead of time to get considered when the legislature comes back, which is what's happening right now all across the country. In Alabama, the first bill that was pre-filed is about banning trans healthcare, like immediately. And like, does the state of Alabama have nothing better to do than make it a felony to treat a trans youth, to provide medical treatment to trans youth? Because that's what this bill would do. It would make it a felony for a doctor to provide treatment to a trans person who is a youth. And now,
I really want to talk
we
about.
don't know what that means yet, because the law is so crappily drafted, as all of these laws are. But that's what we're dealing with.
I got to jump in and read a couple of these. Dan Gonzalez, $5. Hi, Aaron. How are the fur babies? Just wanted to mention a good thing about my Roman Catholic family is they value rationality over dogma. That's good to hear. As a matter of fact, one of my oldest friend in the world said that she learned evolution in a Catholic school. Naderkru, I know I just butchered that. My apologies. $10. What do you think about voting your interests versus voting your values? I feel I will undermine my interests in support of my values, like raising my own taxes for programs that are not for me. Well, that's part of being part of a big club and sharing everything. Is that we're covering all these expenses, and so we've all pitched in. We pay for the dues of membership to this country, and every country has these dues. And the only way out of that is to move to some place that has no government. So if you don't want plumbing and you don't want police and you don't want a fire department, you don't want a military, you can go, live on an island somewhere. And as my wife put it, shit in a bucket. But if you're going to live in a community, you're going to have to pay the membership dues of that community. And yes, sometimes that means that your taxes go to benefit someone who isn't you. And I've never understood why that's an issue for people. If we're not talking about something that is unjust and you're completely against it, it's something evil that your country is doing, that we would have a valid complaint. But if you're talking about, why are you paying taxes to build that road when you don't drive there? I don't get that.
Well, and I think this is an interesting dichotomy, because how different are your interests from your values? I mean, maybe my interest is to have lower taxes, but I do value a decent educational system. I do value a decent healthcare. I do value, and that's also in my interest. One of the things, I actually part of the inaugural group of Humanists for Biden. And I didn't vote for Biden in the primary. I was a Warren guy, and I ended up voting for Warren, even though she was out of the round when the Maryland primary arrived, just for the heck of it. But there's many things that Joe Biden, I don't agree with him.
Joe Biden is not a progressive. He was not any of our first choice.
But one of the things I want to say is, like, in healthcare is my main difference with Joe Biden of many things. It's like, every time he says that line of, if you like your insurer, you can keep it. And I was like, who the hell that likes their insurer? Because like literally, who the hell likes their insurer? I mean, how much money we could be saving? Like how much money I could save without like having to go through these like blood-sucking third-party intermediaries that are called like insurance companies.
The useless middlemen, the completely unnecessary intermediates.
Yeah, I mean, like literally, like right now like it got solved, but we were being charged a bunch of money that we don't know where it came from for a very simple treatment. It finally got solved, but literally we don't even know where the bill came from.
So if it happened that we had a national healthcare system, for example, I mean, my taxes would be slightly higher than they are, but my insurance bill every month would be lower than it is. So I would actually save money. I don't care if they raise my taxes. If I ultimately, when you add everything together, I end up paying less. I get to keep more of my money. So I'm completely down with that.
And we could pay for less nukes. I mean, we don't really know that many nukes. Like, there are many places where we can cut a lot of money, and we don't even have to raise taxes.
I don't care about paying for thousands of dollars for another bomb because we got plenty.
I got to read a couple more of these. I'm sorry. Ronaldo Martinez, $5. I'm an atheist living under a Catholic family with a Baptist aunt and uncle. So damn frustrating. I get that. And then what is this? Gearvash, $4.99. Aaron, when and if I get locked down again, if we get locked down again, do you suspect cooperation or riots? I expect more cooperation this time because we're not going to have an idiot telling people to go out and get sick to become stronger. That was the worst bastardization of Nietzsche that I've ever heard in my life. Especially from a guy who had access to experimental drugs that the rest of us can't have. Okay, and then Gabriel K for $2. Your new president just glorified Psalms. Yeah, we can't. Nobody's perfect. I'm not a purist. I'm not expecting that. But I tell you what I do like. The first speech Biden gave as the suspected president-elect was the first was the first speech we heard that sounded presidential since Obama gave his last speech as president.
Let's just say that at least he knows what Psalms are. Like, it's not like talking about 2 Corinthians.
2 Corinthians walking into a bar. That's actually my favorite psalm. It's a very great phrase about 2 Corinthians walking into a bar. Listen, the thing that people have to remember is it's not about whether or not people individually have religious beliefs. I mean, if we only elect or only support people who are atheists, we're going to rapidly not have any candidates to support because there aren't a majority of Americans who are atheists. There just aren't that many. And the question is, do they support religious pluralism? Do they support a notion of America where everybody has a place at the table and where we are a pluralistic nation where it's not one group versus the others? It's all of us lending strength, e pluribus unum. Come on, we got a motto here. And where they lean on their religion for themselves, but acknowledge that that's not the only path forward. Like, that's what we're talking about here. If Joe Biden finds strength, and I know Joe Biden has found strength in his faith, going back through immense personal tragedy, he's found comfort in that. I'm not going to say that makes him a bad person. And if that's what he uses to find kind of a common language to speak to a lot of Americans, that's great. That's fine. As long as it is followed up with an acknowledgement that that's not the only way forward. And he did say something in his speech that I didn't like. And that was something about how, we all can draw inspiration from this, or it was something about how, we are all one nation under God. Like, I don't like that. But there's a difference between wishing he used slightly more inclusive language and him and members of his or versus him or his administration saying that we as atheists, as secular people, don't have a place in this country and aren't real Americans, which is what some people have said.
Including George H.W. Bush.
Well, that's apocryphal. We don't actually know if he said that, but yes,
Well, it was one of American Atheists.
I know, and it's apocryphal, and we don't know if he actually said it. That's the.
Okay.
I'll tell you, it's that particular person we're not 100% on. But I mean, Ted Cruz said in front of a camera that if a person doesn't start each morning on their knees in prayer, he doesn't trust them to be an effective commander in chief. Marco Rubio said faith in God is the most important American value. Now, these are the people who were running for president in 2016. So this is not, this is not George H.W. Bush in 1989.
I heard Gingrich say something very similar.
Yeah, and so this isn't like radical, Christian Christian radicals who are saying this. These are like mainstream politicians.
I wanted to add something there.
Hold on. I gotta read this before it disappears.
Okay.
The Montourage, $5. How do I get a link? I want into this conversation. You got one. There you are. Then Robert Muldooj JP. I don't know. $20. Aaron, thank you for your series on Noah's Ark. Will you make more series on pointing out blatant errors in the Bible? Yes, it's great fun. And I'm having so much fun with the Quran that when I'm done with the Quran, I might do something similar with the Bible too, because that's just a hoot. And then what was the other one? There was one more, and okay, here we go. Benjamin Donaldson, Australian, $5. There's a big difference between saying God bless America and God should rule America. Yes, that's a very good point.
This is the point I wanted to make on this, because I wanted to validate people on their uneasiness with the Democratic Party, with Biden, and not really giving us as secularists, as non-believers, voice. I think Obama acknowledged us once, and I was sitting in a meeting with teachers, and one of the teachers openly scoffed when he mentioned non-believers. So yes, we're a third of the party. Acknowledge us. We're here. We're good people. You want our votes. You want our tax money. Break us off some representation, at least.
Yeah, somebody just said in the chat that I've never seen anyone in my life that worked hard and was poor. Well, let me take you to some mechanic shops that I know, a whole lot of construction areas that I know, or we can just go to a farm at harvest time. I can show you thousands of people who work very, very, very hard, harder than you probably ever worked in your life, and they're probably poorer than you've ever been. But that's the country that we live in.
Yeah, some
what
neighborhoods I was around and grew up in, and child,
what a just bonkers narrow vision of America. I mean, like Aaron said, if you've ever been to a place where people work on a farm, I mean, I grew up in rural Michigan, and people, not like a rich area, certainly. People who are farmers who, work, they don't work 8-hour days. They don't work 12-hour days. They work 16-hour days with a lunch break somewhere in the middle, because they're just working on their farm all day. To basically break even and do a little bit better. So I don't think you know what you're talking about, with all due respect.
My name is No. My last name is No. Well, no. $5. Ra, I enjoyed to hear Biden and Harris showing support by stating, regardless of your identity. Yes, whatever complaints we will have, and I will have complaints because nobody's ever perfect. There's things that I want to be better, but I have to give them credit. The opening presentation, that was inclusive. It was healing. It was about love. It was regardless who you are, even if you didn't vote for us, we still welcome you. We will still work for you, work with us. And that was brilliant. I loved the way they did that. It really was the contrast between the last 4 years of hate and now love. This is what we get. I don't understand how anybody could have a violent revolt over that shit. And then Patriot University PhD, $5. Okay, that's not just a name. That's an actual fact. Patriot University PhD, $5. RN Raw, why haven't you released a new batch of your beer to the public? The masses want to know. I don't have a brewer. The guy produced 2 cases of Godless Heathen, and it was good. I mean, it actually had a really good flavor to it. Wasn't very potent or anything, but it was good. And never heard from him again. He disappeared off the planet. I was going to bring...
Struck down.
I wanted to bring cases and cases of this stuff to the American Atheist National Convention in Cincinnati because it was so good, and the label was great. But the label actually said brewed by godless perverts from the tears of the innocent. It was brilliant, but the guy didn't produce anymore. Oh, I got to know one more. Randy Rain, $5. Never forget the orange idiot said, "So you might National Park."
Yosemite. He didn't know Yosemite.
Yosemite.
Oh,
I think that my favorite part of that were all of the people on Jewish Twitter who were like, "Oh yeah,
yes,
that's how I greet my homies after temple, Yosemite." What's up, my Semite?
So if I could just throw out one question, since it was the topic of the day, what is it that this administration needs to do for the secular community, and that realistically they can't do, that we need to be petitioning them to do?
He's the activist. He's the activist.
Depending on how you're pointing, yeah. So, yes.
I'm pointing at you, but my camera is kind of like
not great. So, I mean, the number one thing is there's a lot that can be done through executive authority, through executive orders, rescinding certain interpretations of the law. People have to understand what an executive order is. An executive order is not the law. It's basically an interpretation of the law. And so an executive order can be something like saying what the president did, which was in his sort of fake, are we allowed to swear on this? I don't know. On his bullshit
no children watching.
About the Johnson Amendment, where he said, consistent with all the laws, we interpret the Johnson Amendment to not mean that it infringes on anyone's First Amendment rights to free speech, but nothing in this executive order should be construed to violate the law. So it was just basically a nothing burger that didn't do anything. But Joe Biden can turn around and say, listen, IRS, you need to enforce the Johnson Amendment as it applies to all nonprofits equally, like American Atheists, like every church, right? You need to enforce the limits on church tax exempt status. You need to, all of these are executive directives that tell essentially all these agencies where to point their energy, where to focus things on, and how to interpret the law consistent with the values of the administration. And so we have a list. We've been working on this. I mean, we've been prepping for this for months, for the last year, in fact, prepping with our coalition partners and internally to basically give the incoming administration, a list. Here are the 25 executive orders you could implement immediately on day one that would roll back things that the Trump administration has done that have been devastating to religious equality. A great example of that is, we talked about the interpretation about sexual orientation and gender identity. That's one. The trans military ban, which has been enjoined and isn't actually being enforced. That's another. But just as importantly are these religious freedom task forces that the Department of Justice set up right from the get-go, where they put out this memo that's page after page after page of just bloviating about the Establishment Clause, and then literally a paragraph, it's a page after page about the Free Exercise Clause, basically saying the government can't infringe on exercise. We can't do anything that would prevent people from exercising their religion. And it's just page after page after page of not great legal research and, kind of bullshit stuff. And then it was literally one paragraph of Establishment Clause stuff. Those are two clauses in the Constitution. Both of them are important. They are necessary pillars of protecting religious freedom in the United States. The idea that the government can't tell you how to worship, except in certain circumstances, but also that the government can't give preference to one religion over another, or religion in general over non-religion. That last part has just been completely forgotten for the last 4 years. And that's something, without Congress, it's just an administrative thing that they can do. Now, depending on how the Senate races come out, we think there might be enough votes for the Do No Harm Act, which would rein in RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. There are certainly things that the Biden administration could do that would kind of blunt the problems of RFRA. Just again, administratively, depending on how the Department of Justice spends its time, how the Office of Civil Rights spends its time, and all these little subcategories. There's a lot that can be done immediately. And so that's job number one. You can do this, stroke of a pen, day one. But the other part of it is judges, appointing judges that don't view the Establishment Clause as just an unfortunate distraction, judges that don't think that religion is a license to discriminate, judges that don't think that a religious service provider is entitled to a government contract, even if they're not obeying the requirements of the contract. I mean, that's where we're at right now. Just doing the very basic things of appointing competent judges would be a great thing. But that's really hard to do if the Senate, if Mitch McConnell in the Senate is going to say, we're not going to confirm a single Joe Biden judge. So there's a lot that can be done administratively, but the list is much bigger if anything can get through Congress.
Well, we got a much better chance.
On that, what do you think with like religious freedom laws? If the Supreme Court takes one of those cases, does it make it the precedent of the land that they can discriminate based on religious freedom, such as deny adoption agencies, deny LGBT?
I mean, they've already taken the case. So this was
rights.
the case, the Fulton versus Philadelphia, that they heard argument in earlier this week on Wednesday, the day after the election. The first big marquee case heard with Amy Coney Barrett on the court. We're sort of preparing ourselves for ranges of outcomes from, the simply bad to the utterly catastrophic. Now, the thing that you have to remember about all of these is as soon as a national law is passed, it has to work its way through the whole system. And, that takes time. But we also have opportunities in the states. There's a lot that can be done at the state level here. We can increase access to federal or to state courts to make sure that people's constitutional rights are protected. We can pass equivalents to the Do No Harm Act at the state level, laws that make it clear that religious freedom is not an excuse to discriminate, that anti-discrimination laws are not implicated under RFRA, meaning that you can't raise a RFRA claim if we're talking about an anti-discrimination law. RFRA, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, is a statute. It's not the Constitution. And so all that needs to happen is a law passed to say, okay, this doesn't actually apply over here, right? And restore RFRA to its original intent, regardless of how misguided that intent was. And we can certainly talk about that another time. It's one of those things where it's like, we told you so. It took 20 years, but we told you so. The RFRA is creating these loopholes that you can drive a truck through. And that's really unfortunate. And all they need to do is pass a statute that says RFRA does not apply to the following types of laws. And then we're done, unless the Supreme Court turns around and, to your point, says, just kidding, it's a First Amendment issue. Then we have to spend a little bit more time, and it's a lot more complicated.
It seems like
what happens.
We at that point, perhaps if we're not already doing this, we probably are. We would need to take a more ecumenical approach and have some religious LGBT say that they're discriminating against their religious freedom.
And that is what is happening, and that's something that is exactly correct. That this isn't. We're not making this. This is not an atheist issue. The city of Fulton, Fulton versus City of Philadelphia, brought together a really broad coalition, not just of atheist groups, obviously, and not just LGBT groups, but even religious groups. I mean, the Baptist Joint Committee is one of the most outspoken advocates for religious equality and the vision of the First Amendment that makes sense to all of us. That there is, and they're really powerful advocates in this space because they can speak authentically about what religious freedom actually means as a religious person. Because, the argument coming from an atheist saying, well, actually, this is what religious freedom means, sometimes rings a little hollow. And so it's important that we do have religious allies and that we work with them, and that's what we do. But, this Fulton case is really insidious because they're essentially, the Catholic health or the Catholic service provider is essentially arguing that just very banal, completely benign statements from people in city government years ago show evidence of animus, when in fact they were saying things like, wow, we're really excited about this new pope. He seems great. And it will have a different view on discrimination than the old pope. Wow, exciting. Or, we hope that the new bishop who's overseeing this archdiocese will be more in line with what Pope Francis has said about this topic than the previous bishop. And that's somehow anti-Catholic. Like, oh, we really enjoy what Pope Francis has said. We hope this guy listens to him. Like,
And you
I
know,
have to read a couple more of these.
just a second before you do that, as atheists, we kind of know, we're kind of in on this secret that whenever you're talking about what a religious person believes, it's up to interpretation. So like so how could anybody say whether the Pope is really Catholic or not for supporting homosexuality, or and I think that's one way to defend it. It's not an attack on you as a Catholic if they discuss the Pope friendliness to, like, it's just hard for me.
Yeah.
I'm ex-religious, but still, like, you could get one part of the Bible to say one thing and one to say another. So
yeah, well, right, and that's why it's catastrophically dumb to be making laws based on what one group thinks the Bible says.
Yeah,
and maybe we should speak in values and make laws that are and talk about why we're creating laws in language that's accessible to everyone. And that's something that President Obama did a really good job of articulating that. And I hope that President-elect Joe Biden will do the same thing.
And you remember
communicate those religious values.
Thomas Jefferson in the Danbury Baptist Church.
I got to read this before it disappears. Snarf McDreary, €2. First thing, climate change, nature protection. And then we have the Gamer Hippie says politics and law have always subversively pushed religious rhetoric and given Christians preferential treatment. Religion is a barrier to progress. And then there was one that, for whatever reason, showed up on one chart, but not where I could have it show for everyone to see. So Art 19, $20. Thank you very much for that. It says, while I'm glad somewhat Biden won, I do find it disheartening that Trump received 70,804,968 votes. That's a lot of people who are okay with what Trump represents. Remember that the propaganda was telling people that they are voting for my freedoms. So they're voting for freedom. And simultaneously, I don't know how this is, but they get angry that anybody could just decide that they're a woman if they want to. Somehow that's not freedom. I guess. I don't know. There's huge issues there. And then there was another one that I tried to read, but I didn't get to it before it disappeared. So I apologize for that. Please continue.
I was going to say something about the total vote for... I've been in a positive mood this week. As I told you Tuesday, I can't believe you guys went on until like 7 a.m. in the morning.
We did an 11 and a half hour hangout.
I know.
Absolutely foolishness.
I caught at 10:30. But like I've been looking at the positive of this thing, and I'm looking at it in terms of 48 years ago, Richard Nixon got 60% of the popular vote on a law and order campaign message. 48% in 50 years, I'll take it as a victory.
Cam Ruby, $4.99. Earlier in the conversation, were you referring to Godless Red Willow Brewery? I don't think so. This was some private, it wasn't a brewery. It was just some guy who happened to brew a very good tasting stout for me and let me put my name and label on it. One of the other chat that I couldn't find to post on the screen, I remember what it was asking about. It's an interesting question. Since since any president of the United States has lifelong security, presidential security after that for the rest of their lives, how does that work when a president has been convicted of multiple felonies and should be in prison?
Not yet. So
who knows?
Yeah, I mean, we are on, like, we were, in the last 4 years, we have been on, the word unprecedented has been used a lot in presidential terms. Now it's going to be used a lot in former president terms. So, I mean, do you get like Secret Service protection while you're on trial at The Hague? I don't know. I hope not. But I mean, really, who knows?
Well, I don't think we're not talking about The Hague. I mean, there's nothing that would bring our current, soon-to-be ex-president to The Hague that I'm aware of.
I don't know. Forced
what about children
hysterectomies
in
sounds pretty
cages?
bad. Yeah, forced hysterectomies in detention camps of migrant women sounds pretty bad to me. I don't know. Like,
But I mean, I thought that there was a legal jurisdiction thing that the United States would not send that kind of.
The United States is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. That is true. Yeah.
Okay.
But
All right, well, that's all I was talking about.
One can dream. I mean,
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that
It's not like we don't have just a bucket of felonies.
I'm sure that
There's
like
other
the New
things
York,
that are more likely. Yeah.
exactly.
the southern-
No.
southern
But
district of
you
New
know why
York.
I bring this up? Just because, as I said in a tweet earlier today, like, we wouldn't be in this mess if Richard Nixon's butt had been put in jail 50 years ago.
Yes.
The fact that people can get away with stuff just because they held important positions is one of the worst things that happened in this country.
Well, we're in a different time now.
When he got sick with corona, like, literally, like, I was hoping he was dying because, like, there's no way he was gonna see justice. I mean, I'm having fun right now how he's like unraveling this week just because I have very, very little doubt or very little faith that he's going to have any legal consequences for what he's done as a president. I think he's going to get probably prosecuted for stuff he didn't do as president, of all the scams that he was running that we're waiting for to try him because he's not president of the United States anymore. But I don't think he's going to fare any consequences for what he has done as a president.
Well, no, I don't see that happening. I know that there's like the state of New York has like a whole wealth of things that they're waiting to hit him with. We're not living in the same time that it used to be. I mean, once upon a time, I remember when Vince Neil of Motley Crue killed somebody by, driving 140 miles an hour over the speed limit while drunk. And he ends up where manslaughter charges would have put any of the rest of us in prison for no less than a decade in the general population. He spent 30 days in a private cell that had a color television because he's rich and famous. But now Epstein was a billionaire. Bill Cosby is doing time. So we don't live at that same time anymore.
Yeah, but they weren't president of the United States.
Those weren't what?
They were not
They
presidents
were-
of the United States.
He's right. He's right.
I mean, it's
I almost wonder if it would be better for the peaceful transfer of power, but this is just, he can't pull a Gerald Ford on Nixon because he's got state crimes that he can't, Biden, even if he wanted to, can't pardon him for. He says he wants to leave the
He
country
has
if he
to leave
loses.
the country.
Like, I almost think it would be better if he did, because it's not worth if somebody gets hurt or killed or any kind of civil unrest during a transfer of power, because he keeps insisting,
What are
I'm the president.
chances that Russia will do
Okay.
extradition.
like, I'm definitely sure. Like, I agree with you there that, like, I think he's going to be able to get away. I mean, being on a higher socioeconomic ladder, when you're towards the top side of that you already have some insulation there. As people might remember the affluenza teen. If you're not familiar with that Ethan Couch, just look that up. Somebody underage that was drinking, got into his parents' car, if I'm not mistaken, drove and killed multiple people, but avoided, said because his lawyer put up the defense of affluenza for someone being so rich and privileged that they could not reasonably understand the consequences of their actions. That type of thing. And that's what was argued before the court. He got a very light sentence. It's gone through some iterations now, but that was the original sentence. And it's just like, it's mind-blowing. But for something like that, even though somebody mentioned Epstein and Bill Cosby, but the president factor on top of being higher on that socioeconomic ladder, I think it's going to have some serious insulatory powers with regards to what prosecution can do, how long it's going to take, because I'm sure he'll just be throwing lawyers in there to say, you hold it up, delay it, XYZ, it'll be all kinds of things, let alone if he just says, screw it, I'm out of the country. He can do that and just go to one of his freaking golf, places around the world or something like that and go chill out there or something.
Yeah. And
the thing that you mentioned that I think is important here is separating out the distinction between actual crimes he committed, that he may or may not have committed, in his business life, lying on taxes, tax fraud, insurance fraud, banking fraud, things like that, and things that he did that aren't crimes, but are exercises of the executive authority of the United States that are just completely antithetical to our values and should be crimes, but aren't necessarily, or are norm breaking, or
what you're describing now
to the limit.
What you're describing now is the definition of high crimes.
That's
seriously it. High crimes is where it's not actually a crime, but it is only a crime because it is an abuse of power, that only the super powerful could have done this injustice that normal everyday people could not have done.
Right, and that's that the supposed political, or the supposed solution to that, impeachment, is not about whether or not he's done a crime. It's a political tool, and that's all it is. And when they say high crimes and misdemeanors, that isn't defined. There is no statute that says what a high crime and misdemeanor is. It isn't just did you do this crime? Did you meet all the predicates for obstruction of justice? It doesn't matter. Did you abuse your authority? A high crime and misdemeanor from the context of impeachment is whatever the House of Representatives says it is, and then it's whatever the Senate wants to do as far as conviction is concerned. And so that's what we're talking about here. The likelihood of him being prosecuted for anything he did in office, I think, is vanishingly small.
That seems like it doesn't make sense to me, because why do we have stuff like the annulment clause?
Yeah.
If we can't,
and that's the problem, and this is the challenge with so much of our jurisprudence, is you have to have standing. And the question is, and we're never going to get an answer to this now, because the emoluments clause isn't going to apply to Donald Trump after he's president. Now,
but
I don't know.
They didn't hold him responsible because they said they couldn't indict a sitting president. So either way,
there's all these fun, political theory things about sovereign immunity and what sovereignty means in the United States. The notion of sovereign immunity coming from kings and divine rights of kings and so on.
That's bullshit.
Which is really scary. Yeah, not in line with our values. But the question of indicting a sitting president is not the same as it's not a crime for the president to violate the emoluments clause. It's unconstitutional. Those are different things. And so the emoluments clause, I don't know what's going to happen here. This is an open question, and this is something that people who are smarter legal scholars, or who are legal scholars at all and are smarter than me, let me separate out those two things, are going to need to grapple with, because I don't think any of us, we're in really uncharted territory here, because it's never been a problem before, right? That's the watchword of this administration has been lighting norms on fire. And just violating things, even if they're not a law, the things that we expect our presidents to do, and even sometimes things that are laws if they only rely on the executive branch to hold itself accountable. So something like the Hatch Act, or any number of other things where they have to self-police, they just didn't.
Much as I want to dive into this, I have to read these super chats. My apologies. Musical Madman, Canadian 699. What is the real truth on Trump's relation with Israel and bringing peace in the Middle East? I'm quite something with politics. Somebody be prepared to answer that one while I jump to the next one. Tilden Peacock, $5. What is the possibility of SC justices, Supreme Court justices, retiring or leaving another way, or will Biden seek to add justices to correct the Garland fiasco? So that's another one to keep in your memory banks. And one more that I couldn't find a post is from Yes Ma'am for $10. It says, I wanted to say thanks to Facts, Logic, and Reason for the advice they have given me. I commented on one of your videos seeking help. Thanks for all that you do for everyone. Thank you. All right, so address those two questions. You remember what they are?
The Middle East, I'm not a foreign relations kind of guy, and I don't in many ways, Israel has been a it's been a football where between the left and the right. It's kind of funny. I did a chat with Jews for a Secular Democracy when we were, and it's interesting for the most part because like Israel is not a top concern of Jewish American voters, and those, it's kind of like immigration with Latinos. Like people talk about like immigration as an issue for Latinos, but if you look at most people who care about immigration are white Republicans, which probably not have the same concern about Latinos and immigration. And it's the same thing with Israel. Like it's low in the priorities of Jewish voters and very high in the priorities of white evangelicals. And so what it means, what Trump did an agreement, I believe, with Yemen or with Saudi Arabia. I don't remember
UAE,
what.
The UAE.
And that had nothing to do with solving the issue of Palestine and the what do you call the constructions that they're
Settlements.
Thank you, the settlements. So
Palestine, Israel,
certainly we're not closer to peace than we were like 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And
it is good that the UAE, as I understand it, it was the UAE decided to reestablish a working relationship with Israel.
Great.
Was that right?
Yeah. UAE, Yemen, and I believe there was one other one. There were like 3 countries.
Bahrain.
That might have been it.
I'm looking at here.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's
great.
That is great. But I don't know what credit Jared Kushner can take from that.
Yeah, and the thing that I think, if you listen to foreign policy hands talking about this, now, I do think there needs to be a shakeup in sort of the conventional wisdom about American foreign policy. I think the idea that, we didn't stumble our way into any wars for the last 4 years, like that's a pretty low bar to clear. But hey, I'm glad that we didn't. Right.
It's not like we didn't rattle sabers with little.
Right. But that's the thing is, it's stunning that we didn't with Iran. Right. We assassinated, we killed an Iranian general on Iranian soil with an airstrike under some pretty sketchy international legal frameworks that I think a lot of people looked at and went, "Whoa, that's crazy! Don't do that." But one of the things that the foreign policy folks have said was helpful in a lot of this is that they didn't trust that Donald Trump would be sane in administering American foreign policy, and the notion that the American president has, some really alarming authority to inflict American military power on whomever for 28 days until Congress requires a war declaration, right? And so, that's something to keep in mind. And that sort of unpredictability and incoherence is like in a weird way, kind of like a superpower for dealing with other incoherent, self-interested, rogue states that rely on sort of living in the space between American foreign policy, and they rely on some level of consistency and coherence. And so when that was taken away, they were pretty willing to suck up to him and try to cut a quick deal, like with North Korea. That didn't really do much, but they didn't want to push buttons because they knew that something crazy could happen with the president because he was so unhinged. But the last thing I'll say on this, the idea that Donald Trump was, there's famous article that I think it was Maureen Dowd just got absolutely dragged for over the years of, Hillary the hawk and Donald the dove. The notion that Donald Trump was a foreign policy dove. Like Donald Trump did not want to be involved in new wars, but he also lied about his support of the Iraq war at the time. So that's important to note. But Donald Trump didn't stop drone striking people. Donald Trump increased the use of American drones over the high point of the Obama administration, and the Obama administration increased drone usage markedly over the Bush administration because Barack Obama ran on a platform of, slowly withdrawing American troops from foreign policy engagements. Now, Trump sort of continued that. It's like a lot of stuff that happened within the Trump administration was a continuation of the actual policy of Barack Obama, like just keeping on in some ways, like the machinery of government doing its thing, but with Donald Trump occasionally like lobbing a grenade here or there. And you know, just the administration sort of placating him and saying, "Oh yes, Mr. President, we did that thing you asked," and then, you know, implementing a program that, you know, increased drone strikes by 125%. So
I have to read some more real quick. Marty Bad Scientist, Canadian $5. Be curious if a Texas social studies K-12 textbook from 1970 is better or worse than 2020's. I would bet that it is better, actually, and that
social studies.
Yes, social studies. I would bet that it is better, except that we have had some real disasters pass through in Texas. As far as they've actually done more damage to social studies than they have to science.
Oh, you mean the current? Do you mean the current one is better, or the 1970s one is better?
They did say 1970s, didn't they?
Yeah, I would submit that social studies in 1970s may be like the one area that would be particularly bad in certain southern states in the 1970s. Just going to throw that one out there.
Yeah. But it didn't get much better.
We don't know
we had
what
a
you're
social
talking
studies
about.
textbook that said that described slaves as immigrant workers.
Involuntary migrants.
Yeah. And then we have John Garganot, $10. Hey, Aaron, what do you think of the first steps are to fixing education in our country? Well, personally, I would like. That's such a long answer. I'm going to have to make a video on that. Really,
Get rid of the vaults is a good start.
That's
Yeah.
And then we got one more that I can't
Alright.
find to put on screen. It says Metalhead, $10. Aaron, thank you for all your work. What do you think Biden's first steps in office will be, and what will he focus on? Well, one thing that I hope that he would do, I understand that they've already changed the policy on detention and separation of parents and children at the border. I would like to really pursue that. I would like all of those people who are anybody who's still being held, if there are, and I don't know what the current status on that is, but I was hoping that the new administration would just give those people a path to citizenship. I mean, just that they came here for that purpose. They came here fleeing other things. They didn't bring their children because they're irresponsible parents. They brought their children because they were fleeing a disastrous situation. You don't leave your children in a disastrous situation. You take them with you. And when you go when you cross the border, you seek asylum. You're seeking asylum. You're not seeking imprisonment so that your children will be taken away. I don't understand why there are so many Republicans who don't understand that. People don't bring their kids to this country so that they can do bad things.
And their ancestors are guilty of the same thing then, because a lot of European ancestry, they brought their children with them fleeing some kind of problem where they were from. So it's
Immigrants.
Yeah, so like it's hypocrisy.
So I want to go back a little, two things. One, to go back to what Nick was talking about, foreign policy, and then go with the Supreme Court question that was before that. I think one of the things that we, in the foreign policy space, it's how much power it's actually centered on the president making unilateral decisions in the system. And, political scientists have been complaining about that for years. Not necessarily the foreign policy heads, but certainly like the American political development ones, in terms of the imperial presidency. And, essentially the worst case scenario was this fear that, concentrating all that power in the hands of this particular person, it worked on a lot of assumptions. One, that whoever was going to be the president at any given time was going to be a person of sound judgment. And now, I just realized that Suleiman strike happened this year or 20 years ago this year. It's it's kind of crazy. But also, in terms of that a lot of the things that have happened, even with immigration, which is more of a domestic policy, but that you have to deal with people coming from other countries in case of asylum and other types of migration to this country, have to do in the sense, Trump was talking in the debate about who built the cages, like, and the thing is, like, he doesn't necessarily have a point, but the fact is that what he did was the perfect, like the end point, or the natural end point of years and decades of very cruel immigration policy making. So the problem with Donald Trump is not just that he's a horrible person, it's that there were a lot of horrible policy making over the years that led to that person having powers that nobody should have had in the first place. So
that's why I think it would be a dangerous precedent if we don't prosecute this president. I've got to read a couple more. Andrew Pliakis, €10. Well, no way to go but up. That's true. That's true. Let's make America great again. Look how great we are now. Remember when Trump said that if Biden is elected, that we won't have Christmas, you won't have any holidays, and you're going to lose your economy? He says this right after they canceled Halloween.
Say, Judge Janine said that she could say "Merry Christmas" louder, if I'm not mistaken. I think that was the concept on Fox News.
You could always say it.
Well, no,
she can say it louder. No, she can say it louder. Is what she'd say.
Happy holidays! Now we're free.
We're already lining up, so thank you to all of our affiliates who are standing by in neighborhoods all across America, ready to go door to door, taking all your Christmas decorations. We're ready to go, implementing, the atheist Sharia.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Joe Biden, for giving us millions of dollars to implement this, forced re-education program. We really look forward. That's sarcasm, by the way. Sarcasm.
It's not even possible to say "Happy Holidays" in a menacing voice. Happy Holidays.
I've never heard people say things like "Merry Christmas" with such aggression.
Merry
Christmas.
All right, so I got to finish reading these. I'm hopeful that steps will be taken to repair the damage, especially on science and environmental issues. Keep up the good work. Thank you. Yes, we must take urgent action on the environment, and I'm all about that. Curious Wanderer, $5. What did you think of Biden's emphasis on science? Do you also think that Trump have become authoritarian and will challenge voters continuously? Not continuously. He's going to do something weird while trying to stay in office, because he knows that as soon as he's out of office, he's on charges. And he's also $100 million in debt, or $1 billion in debt. We're somewhere in that range.
450, yeah, it's a big number.
Okay, and then we've got another one coming. This is D-Man Jones, $5. Well, it's been a fun first time on RN live stream, but my phone's about to die and I don't have a charger at the moment. Biden 2020, Black Lives Matter, and godless blessings. Thank you very much.
That's funny. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I appreciated during a lot of Biden's speeches that he would, especially, it was around the pandemic, which was, of course, one of the number one issues going into this election. And I think that's, getting back, I don't know how long this was going, the conversation about what the administration could do, even without the Congress side, they could put a larger influence and focus on evidence-based policy surrounding even the pandemic. Because can you imagine what our current life would be like if we had an executive branch that was focused on looking at the science and the data of what was going on as early as they could? Even if they got some things wrong, how would that have changed the trajectory of this country? How many people have lost their lives? And not only that, which people kind of forget about, folks that have been permanently damaged by this virus in some way, where their lungs get hit. I had family members fairly recently that had their lungs hit, and right now they're still in the process right now of doing scans periodically to see, well, what is that damage going to look like over time? And they're not even 80 or 90 or whatever Dan Patrick said here in Texas about elder people sacrificing themselves for the younger folks.
I wish it was that. It was sacrificing yourself for the economy.
Yeah, and it was. And it really was. And it's just amazing that he was sitting there on a straight face saying that. And I'm like, this fool is representing our state. Well, freaking
somehow that guy keeps getting elected.
He does. Yeah,
People
it's still
having-
there.
I'll never forget that the like lapel pin that he was wearing that was like a cross superimposed over an American flag in the speech he gave talking about how we needed to kill grandma for the good of the economy. It was like,
I've got to read a couple more. If you have interest in this question, please make a note of it because I've got 3 to read it together. Cam Ruby, 499. What do you think of limiting Supreme Court justices to no more than 10 years after being appointed? I would like to hear that answer, but I've got to read this one also. Warren Maroney, $10. How long do you think it will be before Republicans gaslight us and deny ever having supported Trump? My uncle voted for Trump on Tuesday and literally told me on Friday he didn't support him. I'm sure Lindsey Graham will deny him 3 times.
Oh my goodness. That shape-shifting cretin. Anyway, continue, please.
Harbinger of Battle, $4.99. Anytime someone tells me Merry Christmas, I like to respond with heathens greetings. I like that too. I may start using it.
Yeah, but I'll finish this one point that y'all could hit those questions regarding the focus on science and evidence-based policy in the administration. So, many of you, may not be as aware. Just in my volunteering, this is just where I go. But one thing that I did put down regarding this is, having an administration, especially through the federal HUD, that's able to effectively target the reduction of individuals living in unhoused environments. And so one thing that you may not be aware of is during the Obama years, there was a policy called the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing that essentially put data in the hands of local communities and essentially forced them, every local community receiving HUD dollars for fighting homelessness, to make a concrete, data-driven and community member-driven plan to foster thriving communities in their local sector. And so in the Travis County area, which is the county that Austin is in, I've been to Ending Community Homeless Coalition meetings there. And when they bring this data together so that all the providers, we're talking about the VA, Integral Care, you're talking about the big players that, have huge budgets to fight this particular issue in the Travis County area. And each year they go over the statistics that come with it. Like, for example, African Americans make up only 8% of the population there in Travis, but are 35% of those experiencing homelessness in that region, for example. And so one of the things that we tackled during one of those meetings, are looking at the disparities of who was getting helped. Are they young people, LGBT people, people that are victims of domestic violence, veterans, disabled? There's all these different categories that go down where you can actually look and see how many people were coming into homelessness, how many people were exiting homelessness, and where are we looking at the problems that are there. Ben Carson, in his authority as, leading the housing and urban development on the federal level, stopped that policy, has been knocking it ever since 2018, and issued this year that program was a waste of time, for example. Those are the types of decisions that I look at. I mean, it's a very specific one to like the work that I do, but these are the types of decisions that I hope will change, and can happen without congressional support. Even if the Senate stays in Republican hands, that's something they can do as the policy they set that affects so many million communities, so many millions of communities around the country, and millions of people, should I say, in local communities around. Because as we combat these huge issues, if we're not going in with the best information that we can, whether it be the pandemic and how to fight it, whether it be homelessness, education, socioeconomic disparities, and people living in poverty, if we don't have that information at our fingertips, how in the world can we be equipped and empowered to make a plan to start attacking that and actually analyzing what we've done as a result of that and refining that to make it better, to make sure that these folks are not living in those situations for longer than they have be?
I
Let
could
me get off
say
that.
Can I just give that a standing ovation, please? That's absolutely, like, fucking amen.
I could say in Texas we have this issue where we're trying to study the foster care system, and because of how bad it is here, and 40% of people who are in the foster care system age out into homelessness. So, like, we have an awful foster care system here that they need to collect data on and they need to fix. But I think that someone like a Ben Carson or our politicians here, they don't want to identify the problem because they don't want to raise taxes to pay to fix the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
And it's up to people like in Austin. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, like, for that particular issue, like in Austin, there's the Youth Homeless Collective, which is an advocacy group that attends those same meetings with all these large providers, trying to push for policies focusing on that youth homelessness, stuff like that. But a lot of places don't have even an advocate to sit at the table to let the rest of the providers and the decisions makers know that get all these millions of dollars year after year about what their experiences are in the first place.
Yeah, and
So I got a couple more that I got to read.
Let Nick finish and then you can do it.
Well, I was just going to say that this is a pattern throughout the administration where they say, "Oh, what we want to do is give money to. We don't want to take the money out of the government's hands because the government isn't good at things. So we're just going to give money to providers. And by the way, those are going to be religious providers, because religion is good at providing services. And so we're going to give these grants to religious groups that don't have to serve everyone, that don't have to keep data on what they're doing, that are not required to abide by, that they say, the government says, is not required to abide by equal rights, civil rights protections. This hollowing out of the social safety net and giving it and putting it in the hands of the religious groups that are free to discriminate, free to use coercive practices when they're giving out services, say, oh, you need to study the Bible with us if you're going to receive this food or going to get housing from us. You need to do all these things. That is a travesty, and it's a stain on this country, and it's what this administration has done simply through its executive authority. And that's something that will change immediately. And this data collection thing, Phil is exactly correct. And they've gutted data collection on a range of things, ranging from schools to public health to, as you said, homeless programs and everything else. So,
I want to add something that, talking about data and science, like, it's not, you gave a great example, Phil. Thank you very much. It's, one that is personally close to me, it's the census. Like, the census has been, it's going to be messy. And it's, it's very important, like, personally to me, because as a pollster and as a data scientist, I use the census a lot to help my clients and even like to do my work. And in the fact that many of my friends, living in DC, many of my friends actually work in the Census Bureau, where I was an intern when I was in grad school, and my wife actually works at the Census Bureau. And just seeing like how hard these people are working and how the DS administration has like tied their hands on their backs to try to get these process well done. It's really sad, because not only our representation over the next 10 years depends on this count, but also a lot of resources our community are going to be getting. And if we don't get those like corrections, and it's going to be a really bad decade for social services in this country, just because like for 4 years we had like grifters and ignoramuses in the administration.
I have to read some of these. King Richard III, $20. Well, I can't say I'm surprised by Trump's behavior as this election closed, but it's still humorous watching the tantrum play out. Here is to 4 years of improvement. Yep, there you go. And then I have another. I will certainly drink to that. Carl Eusebius, $5. Phil, I've heard about studies showing that the most cost-effective way to deal with homelessness is to provide people with homes. Can the USA do that? We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then Omnicia Sphinx, $5. Time to party. The orange track is out the door. Yeah, appreciate that. So, Phil, I remember once upon a time, well, hold on, there's another one coming up. Why Call Me Lord, $5. Hope to speak with you, Aaron. I missed my chance when I was a preacher at Reason Rally, but now an atheist working with Michael Langer on documentary. You were a preacher at the Reason Rally trying to talk to me?
And you didn't speak to Aaron? How is that possible? You might be the only one.
Yeah, I so want to talk to you. Let's set that up. Phil, I remember when I was in a homeless situation when I was a young man, and I remember when I was a single parent, that I was like the only man in the WIC office. I can remember that, and I remember there was a time when I went in for the housing thing where they were going to provide me a house if I just had, transportation to get to the meeting and everything. That they were going to give me a house essentially, that a little humble home. So I'm sure it's possible. You have to sit on a waiting list for like a year.
Yes, that there are, depending on where you are, you're waiting. Like it's called the housing first strategy. It is, in order for that to be enacted, it needs to come, like federal HUD provides a lot of money. Like you're not as aware of it because most people aren't, just in general, but they provide millions of dollars to communities around the U.S. And HUD sets priorities as to how those particular funds are used. And so there's different kinds of housing. And the largest issue for homelessness is you have a lot of entrances to homelessness and not a lot of exits coming out. And so federal HUD has, unless they put more money into permanent supportive housing, which is one of the bigger exits and those that have one of the highest degrees of success of people not re-entering homelessness after getting into one of those programs. But that costs a lot of money. That's infrastructure, that's support in general, not only from your food, but also for the rent of wherever you're staying. And so in Austin, there's, for example, foundation communities. They literally build apartment complexes, literally build them on their own. And it serves as a permanent supportive housing complex for that purpose. And so, without more emphasis on that housing first strategy, it's hard to do, but local communities can't do that if they can't raise the funds. I know last time on election night, Texas passed a law that said the local municipalities and counties and all, everyone in between cannot raise their budgets above a certain rate, thereby hamstringing their ability to put money into these programs, even though they need to. And so, as I said on election day, both the one of the city council members from the city of Austin and Travis County representatives came to talk to the Indian Community Homelessness meeting to say, hey, we're going to lose some funding because we're not going to be able to expand our funding for these projects. And so essentially, get your ish in now. You need to talk to your representatives right now while you have time to do so, because in the future, you might be SOL because they may not be able to afford it, depending on what projects they have coming down the line for local buildings or whatever else. That's going to absorb the budget and it's going to leave less for you. And so it has to be, it's not as widespread. You don't hear it too much on the news. You may hear here and there, like, usually it's, somebody homelessness, they did something or they got kicked out of somewhere. That you may hear something like that on the news, but you don't hear about the longer term strategy regarding getting folks out of homelessness and into a housing environment, and doing that when they first enter homelessness, which gives them the best chance of remaining in a non-homeless state, going forward, being able to get back on their feet, being able to get a job, being able to get a checking account and some savings, and being able to shift out. But it's also the lack of affordable housing as well. Because even if you get out of that project, when you're out of that permanent supportive housing environment, well, where are you going to go? In Austin, like, where are you going to go? And how are you going to get there? Which gets into transportation, as we were talking about. There's so many different pieces here. I could talk your ear off for a very long time. So I will not do that. But long story short, yes, we can do a housing first strategy. Yes, that can be employed, but it needs to have federal support along with the local support from states and local municipalities to say, this is a problem that's worth tackling. These people are worth our time and our resources to make sure that they're not on the streets suffering and having open, gaping wounds, on the street, because that's what I see month after month in Austin when we see folks every single month on the first Sunday of every month. All these people in wheelchairs, surgeries on the feet. It's so many issues there, but trying to get people to care about this issue enough to invest resources in it is a whole problem in and of itself.
I want anybody listening to this to pay attention to what Phil is saying. And if there's any capacity that you can help at all, please do. If we can get a wider audience for Phil's message, if we can get somebody that has, legislative power to hear Phil's message or a petition beyond what he's saying, I would love to have that. And even though I've just spent like 11 hours with the man, talking largely about this subject, it's very frustrating that we can't just fix it, because this is one of those things that frustratingly it doesn't matter what you do from the bottom up. This is the kind of problem that can only really be fixed from the top down. I've got a couple more that I have to read. Warren Maroney, $5. I really hope Biden appoints a strong environmentalist to the APA to rein in the fossil fuel industry before it makes us extinct. Yes, and I'd like to add to that Trump completely blew away and disregarded all of the job opportunities that we had in green energy manufacture, and he decided to revitalize coal.
He said coal there was clean coal.
Yeah,
Clean
and
coal.
not only let's just throw out what we know coal to be, really, even if it's clean. Let's also remember that it's entirely automated now. It's not like it was in the 1950s. It's not. You're not going to save jobs with coal, but China showed that you can produce a hell of an industry by producing windmills and solar farms and green. They're producing more electric cars than anybody else in the world. They have a huge industry, and they've created millions of jobs out of green energy. We could have done the same thing, but no, we didn't. We had to go backwards. Curious Wanderer, $5. Curious Wanderer, $5. Phil is very informative and articulative. Much respect. What do you think about Puerto Rico becoming a state as well as DC? Would it be beneficial?
Oh my God, no. Do you really want to hear me? Because
Juhem is from Puerto Rico, right?
Yeah.
I don't know why they directed this question to Phil.
I think they were just like putting it in a question, just in general.
I have family that looks like Phil.
Phil, as a noted Puerto Rican, what are your thoughts on?
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Juhem, if you want to.
I was waiting for Phil.
Okay.
You know what? I am going to defer. For this one, just for this instance, you got it. You got it, champ.
It's really interesting. So Puerto Rico has been a U.S. colony since 1898. Like, the reason I'm a U.S. citizen is because before William McCain got shot, he invaded Puerto Rico with Teddy Roosevelt. And then in 1917, they needed people to go to the First World War, and they made Puerto Rican citizens. Short story long, or actually long story short. So in 100, what are we now? 22 years, the United States has never had an intention to give in statehood to Puerto Rico. It has been in the Republican Party platform for eons. They've never done anything about it. And then Donald Trump said, hell no.
Is it just because they can't figure out a way to arrange 51 stars?
Well, actually, it has been in the plans of many Puerto Rican pro-statehood people even before Hawaii and Alaska were. So, there was a time where we were 48 and they tried to fix it. And so, it has never really been a thing of the Democratic Party. And so it really angers me. Like when liberals start saying, oh, we're going to make Puerto Rico just because they despise Mitch McConnell. They want to expand the Senate. And the only way you can expand the Senate is to add states. But it hasn't really been, this whole conversation hasn't really been a thing about what the people of Puerto Rico want. We know the people of DC want statehood. DC is literally across the street from my house. So, DC is a very adamant in what, and they're actually the freaking capital of the country, and they're in the territory of the United States, surrounded by Maryland and Virginia. In the case of Puerto Rico, there's a strong statehood party. They just had another, fluffy referendum, statehood, yes or no. 52% voted for statehood. 50% of the people didn't bother to vote. So, a lot of these consultations have first, not binding. Congress has not approved them. And they're being actually, biased by the party in power, which is the pro-statehood party. But the thing is, these whole conversations about making Puerto Rico a state have come after Hurricane Maria, and people feeling sorry for Puerto Ricans because Donald Trump was throwing paper towels at us. And by the way, today in DC, there was a Puerto Rican guy throwing paper towels over the White House
I
fence.
did see that. I did see that.
And I cried when I saw it.
Never forget, motherfucker. I think is what he said.
I know. And so it's not, the conversation hasn't been about a genuine interest for the Puerto Rican people or what the Puerto Rican people want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it's like, okay, we need to add 2 senators. But how can you add 2 senators? Like fucking work on the states where you don't have freaking senators.
Now I got to ask a question: If we had Puerto Rico, who else would we have to have? I mean, who also has roughly equivalent equal standing? Do we also have territories in? Is there anybody?
Well, there's Guam, there's the U.S. Virgin Islands, there's even like the Federated States of Micronesia, technically
Isn't the Philippines also a U.S. territory?
No, the Philippines have been independent since 1947.
Okay, never mind.
And I'm probably forgetting a couple of places that are sizable enough.
Washington,
Saipan,
D.C.
the Marshall Islands. Sorry?
Washington, D.C., where you live.
Without counting Washington, D.C., which is...
okay.
I'm sure there's a pattern they can come up with 54 stars.
Well, so there are 5 places, and they're not, like, some of them are relatively small, but Puerto Rico is, in order of magnitude plus bigger than the next one. So Puerto Rico has, 3.5 million people. Guam is next at like 150,000. Like we're talking a pretty big drop off here, but also the U.S. Virgin Islands, Northern Mariana Islands, and I think the one that you left off with was American Samoa.
Thank you. Yeah,
and those are all what are called unincorporated territories, meaning the United States Constitution is not fully incorporated upon them and doesn't have full authority there. They have sort of varying degrees of
self-government of what they
like the government, like the certain parts of the Constitution literally don't apply there, which is interesting. And like American Samoa has different rules for citizenship than everybody else, which I think is really interesting. If you're born in American Samoa, for example, you have the ability to live in the United States, but I think the American,
you're a U.S. national, not a
citizen. That's exactly it. Yeah, you're a U.S. national who is Samoan. You're not necessarily an American citizen. It's very weird and strange. And so, they could be made states, but what you just said is the ball game here. We should probably ask the Puerto Rican people what they want. And one of the challenges with all of these is that these plebiscites, every time that they have one, like one political party says, don't vote in it.
Because the U.S. Congress hasn't approved any of them since 1948.
Right, and that's. But the bottom line here is, it's a fact, by the way, that the Republican Party platform in 2000 and I don't know if it was 16. I don't know if it was 16. It might have been 2012. Included Puerto Rican statehood. Like this has become sort of a polarized political football because people are making it into a polarized political football. If we focus in on the values here, should people who are American citizens have a say in their government? Well, obviously the answer is yes. And this relationship where the resident commissioner of Puerto Rico doesn't get a vote in Congress, and can be there for committees but doesn't get to vote on anything, and the people of Puerto Rico don't get to vote on the president. I don't think that's sustainable when we're talking about a territory that has more people than like 30 states. This is crazy. We need to do something about this. So.
And also, like, we collect taxes from Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So so Puerto Ricans in Puerto Rico do not file federal income taxes. That doesn't mean that Puerto Ricans don't pay taxes, because of course, I don't want to go in, because I could go with Phil and a Phil type rant and go for 10 hours, but I don't want to do that. But no. But the other thing is, before I got into the other thing, and this is why, because I'm a progressive, and so it gets me really angry when progressives are throwing these talking points now. It's the other is that you're assuming that Puerto Rico is going to elect 6 Democrats members of Congress and 2 Democratic senators.
Yes.
And Jennifer Gonzalez, who is the current presidential commissioner, is a Republican. By the way, we went to college at the same time. She was two years ahead of me. So we went to the same school, same department, same student government we served. So
you're saying you want to lead Puerto Rico? Was that what I was getting from that?
It sounded like you were
Senator Doctor. I like it.
No. So what I'm saying is this. She has been active in Republican politics for a long time.
Yes.
So she's a Republican. The governor who she was serving before he quit, or we forced him to resign, was a Democrat. But that's because those partisan divisions don't matter much in internal Puerto Rican politics. But at the same time, in Puerto Rico, there's a strong right-wing conservative Christian movement. So you may be a Democrat and want to make Puerto Rico a fast track into a state, and then get stuck with Jerry Falwell Jr. and Lindsey Graham.
Yes.
The Puerto Rican Latinx versions as senators, just because you didn't do your homework and you assumed that brown people were going to be Democrats.
Yes.
That sounds like a horrible hypothesis.
But okay,
and that's why it's important to talk about it as a value and not as a political football. And I Juhem follows me on Twitter, and you probably see I literally, anytime any Republican says something about this is a left-wing Democrat plan to pack the Senate, I literally tweet every single time.
Yes.
At Rep. Jennifer is a Republican. You should know this. She is the only elected person from Puerto Rico who serves in Washington, D.C. is a Republican, and she's been around. She's been a Republican for a long time. She's been in D.C. for a long time. Do you forget she exists? Maybe you could try competing for this vote. I don't know. That's an idea. And the point is to focus on the value of if the Puerto Rican people want to be represented in Washington in this way, of course they should be, period. That's it.
I appreciate Juhem educating me on this about Puerto Rican politics, because maybe a lot of progressives do think exactly that since it's a Latino place, that you're going to get 2 Democrats out of it. But on a purely Nick is saying value level, if they pay taxes, they should have access to disaster relief funds and such.
I think that's why they're not a state. We don't want to pay for places that continuously get mowed over by hurricanes.
Then get rid of Florida and Louisiana.
Yeah.
Right.
I have some bad news for you Texas residents then.
And by the way, I want to do full disclosure in here. I was raised by a Puerto Rican independence activist. So,
that's what it was about.
A radical.
So the route is really personal.
Yeah.
And so, I was part of that movement. And this is another thing, that it's not related to the question about Puerto Rican statehood, but mostly about what we're talking about foreign policy. And one of the things that I was really pissed off about the last 4 years is how I had to agree a lot with the freaking national security apparatus and how they were taking on Donald Trump, and how at some point the CIA and the FBI were the good guys. Because believe me, the FBI and the CIA weren't very helpful to my dad and his friends. They were very good at suppressing the Puerto Rican independence movement starting in the 1930s, at least. And the 1980s, when I grew up, were very stressful times because we had right-wing Cuban terrorists planting bombs and stuff.
Yeah, I got to read some more chats if you don't mind. Zach Grisby,
Sure.
$5. I read about a plan to mobilize the U.S. economy World War II style to go with green energy. It showed huge job economy and growth as a side effect. Thoughts? We might have already dealt with that one. And then this one, Marty Mad Scientist, Canadian $5. culturally black Christian ministries produce better music than genetic melatonin deficient Christian ministries. Prove me wrong.
That's not even an argument.
I thought
that's a duh.
fact, but
It's a tautology. I don't know who's gonna. Yeah.
I mean, y'all have James Brown, okay, and Rufus and Shaka Khan, but I don't.
Shaka Khan.
Yeah, I don't.
Sorry.
There was another one I was going to read and it disappeared, so I'm sorry I didn't get to it fast enough. My apologies. Do continue, people.
I wanted to circle back to Supreme Court. Somebody had asked a really good question
That's
about
true. Thank you.
10. So two things. One, what do we think about 10-year term limits? And what is Joe Biden going to do to kind of right the wrong about Garland and all the shenanigans? 10 years is a little short, I think. And so in general, I'm not a person who supports term limits for elected officials. We have term limits. They're called elections. And if we made elections more responsive, we would have more natural term limits where people had some level of accountability. The problem with term limits is you end up forcing out people with expertise, and you end up creating this incentive for special interests. And so if you want to see what happens, or a way to, if your goal is to reduce the influence of special interests, term limits do exactly the opposite of that. They increase the power that people like us, lobbyists or advocates, have on specific policies. But if you're a well-heeled business interest, you can write a bunch of legislation, take it to state legislatures, and say, here's a bill. It does this, and maybe you don't portray it exactly right, or it's got loopholes in it, or whatever. That's exactly what's happened in all these states that have adopted really tight term limits. Is people with legislative expertise have you don't have time to develop that type of expertise. The law is complicated. Legislating for big, complex states with diverse economies is a complicated thing. And what we do by pushing out people that develop that any level of expertise is really shortchange ourselves from having good government. If anything, we should be increasing the budgets that state governments have, paying state legislators to be full-time, giving them money for staff so they can research these bills, so they can write better bills. I mean, as somebody who works in state legislation and looks at state laws that are being both proposed and passed, some of these things are just dumpster fires of terrible drafting, terrible ideas, and just open up all sorts of crazy loopholes that they don't intend because they're rushed through, because a state like Texas only is in session every other year, and even then only has a couple months to pass all of the bills that need to get passed, including a budget, in the first couple months of the year, and then they go away and can only be called back for special sessions. And that's not good. That doesn't lead to a responsive government. And so what we should be advocating for, if we want good government, is government that is properly funded, and government that is producing expertise and that has the people behind it to do the research, to make sure that things are copacetic, and you don't have special interests walking through the door and saying, hey, Mr. Congressman, I have a thing for you. It'll work great. Trust me. And because they have, in a state like Arizona, they've got one or two staff members and that's it in their office. And you're asking people with, law degrees to come work for a state legislator and make $30,000. That's crazy. They're not going to do that. They're going to do that for a couple months and then they're leaving, and, so you end up with just terrible laws, people that are overwhelmed. We really need to think about what it is that we want to actually accomplish, not just this reflexive idea that, fat cats in government are getting rich off the backs of hardworking Americans. Here in New Jersey, we have a part-time legislature, but it's in session all year. But a member of Congress, a member of the state assembly, only makes like $40,000 to be a member of the assembly. And a state senator makes like $50,000, something along those lines. And then they only have about $125,000 or $150,000 to pay their staff. And this is, one of the most densely populated states in the country, with one of the largest economies in the country, and complicated issues of tax and, drug policy and, issues of homelessness. And I mean, just all of the things that you have in every other state we have here in New Jersey, plus we're right next to New York, and there's just all the way that interacts with each other. And we're asking people to, and we require our state legislators to have multiple jobs to make ends meet in one of the most expensive places in the country. In a place like Texas, I don't think they get paid. And so, you know what creates a lot of conflicts of interest? When people who are, chairing the Texas Assembly's banking committee are the vice president of a regional bank. That's a conflict of interest, and that's exactly what we've created by this system. So, like, we need to create a better system, and that includes reforming the judiciary. And so, like, that's the original point I was starting to make. But term limits aren't great. 18 years is about the shortest I would think makes sense, but it requires a constitutional amendment. So there are other ways that we can get at this that I think are better, and we have to ask what it is that we're trying to accomplish. If we're trying to accomplish a more responsive court, are we trying to lower the temperature of nominations? Are we trying to just make the court better? Like, what does that actually mean? And there are a variety of proposals out there, including kind of making every circuit court judge a Supreme Court judge is something I've seen, and then pulling a panel of 9 judges at a time to hear cases, to grant cert, to do all the motions and all that. But they wouldn't be the panel that rules on it. So it would require advocates going before the court to make a measured determination about, do we really want to go with this? Because we might, just by happenstance, draw a panel made up entirely of judges that were appointed by Barack Obama. I mean, that probably wouldn't happen, but it might. But you're not going to necessarily get these 6 judges every single time, or these 6 conservative judges that are currently on the Supreme Court. And that means that they have different incentives. So that's one proposal I've seen that I like. One other one that I saw is just appoint a new justice every 2 years. Regardless, and if somebody dies, they don't get replaced, but just keep appointing them. And it lowers the temperature of the appointments, and also expands the size of the court and makes it so any one justice doesn't have as much power. And you don't end up with like one judge always being the middle, but you expand the court a little bit and make it so that one nomination isn't a make or break thing. You just...
Are we going to need this?
Yeah, the size of the Supreme Court and the size of the federal court system is set by statute. It's not in the Constitution at all. The last version of this was, I think it was the Judicial Reform Act of like 1970 something, I think is the last one. And that increased the size of the federal judiciary. It added circuit court judges and it added district court judgeships. But it used to happen all the time. As the United States got bigger, golly, we added more judges because we had more people needing to access the federal courts. And so the fact that it's been frozen for like 50 years or 40 years is ahistoric. Like that's an unusual thing. And it's something that we definitely should change. But yes, it would require the Senate to do it as well, and then required the Senate to confirm those judges.
I wonder if we're going to get some executive branch reform, even if the Senate is still leaning Republican, because the president will be a Democrat. There's not
much that the administration can do as far as changing the makeup of the judiciary, except for who he chooses to appoint. But that still relies on the Senate to actually confirm those nominees. And as we recall, when Hillary Clinton was running, Ted Cruz and others said, we might hold this open seat. At the time, that was Justice Alito's seat after he died, and after
Scalia.
Scalia.
Scalia. Yeah, I'm about to say like Alito's alive.
There's an opening
into reality. Sorry, yes, Scalia. When Scalia died, and they held it open and refused to even have the confirmation hearing for Merrick Garland. Ted, when it looked like Hillary Clinton was going to win, Ted Cruz and others said, well, we may just hold that seat open. We may not. There's nothing in the Constitution that says there need to be 9 justices.
Right.
and then they wet themselves over the idea of adding people to the court after saying, well, if Hillary Clinton wins, we're just not going to confirm anyone to the seat. And so it's hypocrisy. But there's only so much you can do, unfortunately, with the structure that we currently have, which requires the advice and consent of the Senate. So
I have the opinion.
I meant with the executive branch that Trump has shown us a lot of loopholes in holding the president accountable.
Yeah, that was one of the things that concerned me, was that I thought that somebody gave the Republicans the idea that if Trump wins, that Trump could expand the court and that Trump could just like name a whole bunch more judges. So
well,
I've got to read another chat. A Patriot University PhD, $10. I voted for Biden and am happy to see that he is elected. However, we should give credit to Trump for reversing Biden's crime reforms that disproportionately incarcerated African Americans into the prison system. I will leave that to you guys to discuss.
He didn't do anything like that.
I'm about to say he did. It wasn't reversing those.
So a lot of the correction. I don't know if you want to take it, Phil. I have a couple of comments.
You go ahead. I have a few myself. Have at it.
Okay. So few things. Like what Trump has mostly done is commuting sentences of very few African Americans. The difference between Barack Obama and Donald Trump is that Barack Obama was a very good speaker, but he wasn't very good at selling his message. So Barack Obama commuted the sentence of a bunch of people of all races, but a lot of African Americans sentences, but he didn't use any generally them for photo ops, right? Like they got freedom or they got the sentences commuted and they went back home. Like Donald Trump, I think commuted the sentence of like maybe 10 Black people, and he got photo ops for all of them. And he made a big deal of this, but in terms of legislation, as far as I know, he didn't do anything. And a lot of the reversing of the crime bill, of all the damage that the crime bill has done, has happened at the state level. I remember like 15 years ago, I was working with some advocates in Connecticut when we finally flipped eliminated the sentence the sentencing differences for cocaine and crack cocaine and powder cocaine, for example. And so a lot of these things have been happening at the state level, but as far as I recall, I may be wrong, there hasn't been any anything that the Trump administration has done, except for maybe one law that was like passed, but the first step back. Exactly, but this is not like something that Trump came up with, or actually the brainchild of Jared Kushner. Like there has been a lot of stuff that has been happening at the state and the local level that has been doing this, mostly led by Black activists. So it's not like Donald Trump decided one day to be like, Black activists have been moving this battle for nearly 30 years, and just because there was some kind of level of, I don't know what word I would want to use, but reason, if that's the word we can use, that this administration actually got in, it doesn't mean, I don't want to say that it was not an achievement, but I'm just saying that he just didn't decide that we're going to do these because nobody else have done it before, because they've been done many, many, many times.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so
go ahead, Phil. Sorry.
I was going to say, so for the First Step Act, so this was a bipartisan effort that was pushed through. Now, as far as giving Trump credit for signing it, in all honesty, if I'm looking at the same dynamics, any president that would have gotten this bipartisan bill probably would have signed it in themselves. One of the main things that I look at as far as giving Trump credit, so to speak, is not just the signing thereof, but was he talking about these issues in stump speeches? Was he talking about the inequality of African Americans when it comes to incarceration rates? How was he actually addressing these issues when he was talking to the people that cheer for him and love him and everything else? Was he talking about this on Fox News, saying that this is one of his priorities to do? You understand where I'm coming from?
Or at police union rallies that were when they were endorsing him, maybe something like that. Just
right. It's like, this was not something that he pushed for, that it's almost as if he didn't consider it, as if it was laid on his desk and said, this is something good and Black people will like you for this. You should sign this. And that's the only time you kind of heard it come out of his mouth. He references it now to say, like, I did more for them Black Americans, almost up into and maybe including Abe Lincoln or some shit. That's what he says now, but he wasn't talking about anything of this sort beforehand. It was done and powered by other people, by advocacy groups that were back there trying to push this step, and it didn't even accomplish the large sweeping change that you want. So there were changes in recidivism, essentially forcing the inmates, allowing the Bureau of Prisons to help them in applying for federal and state benefits, obtaining their identification once again, Social Security, essentially trying to take away some of those arbitrary barriers that they might have in re-entering society. That should have been from Jump Street in the first place. And the fact that it wasn't is a fucking travesty. Like, just, I'll put it that way. I'll calm myself slightly on that side. But it was a travesty in and of itself. And it shouldn't have taken this in order to force that to be done in the first place, but I'm glad that it was there. And so when you're looking at the First Step Act, when you're actually reading and the differences that it makes, it's not a huge jump on that side. And I like that Trump actually signed it. By the same token, honestly, why wouldn't he? And if he didn't see it to his benefit, would he have signed it in the first place? Because it wasn't his brainchild, as Juhem just said. It wasn't something that he was pushing for. This was not his baby on the side. He didn't care about this issue until it was brought before him and say, you should probably sign this, champ. It'll help you with those African-American folks. It'll get you some colored votes if you sign this, sir. You know, that type of thing. So I don't look at it in the way. I give him props for signing timing-wise, but not anything beyond that.
It's kind of I almost view it as like a, Nixon goes to China sort of thing, that if it was Obama, I mean, the First Step Act was originally proposed in 2015, and it had bipartisan support. But you know who blocked it? Attorney General Jeff Sessions when he was in the Senate, and Tom Cotton. And you know who else opposed it? Bill Barr, right? Like, these are people, the idea that Donald Trump somehow reversed, all the damage that Joe Biden caused. It's like the crime bill. People kind of forget the history of this. The crime bill was not good. And, Joe Biden has kind of said, yeah, I would definitely do that differently again. In part because of when it was proposed was right. And when it passed the Senate, if I'm getting my timeline, my chronology correct here, it passed the Senate. And then there was the Republican takeover of the House, or the revolution, the Gingrich wave, 94, and some of the, or maybe some, again, I might be getting my timeline wrong here. Do you know if that's right, Juhem?
Yeah, the Gingrich wave was.
And so what ended up happening is they passed this bill that said, okay, we're going to put in place all these like stricter, policies for drugs and whatnot, with the intention, and this is what he says, and you can take him at his word or not. And he again says that he regrets proposing it and doing it this way. But then they said, okay, we're actually going to cut all the funding for the prevention policies and just use the carceral state side, the jailing people and locking them away, and the enhanced penalties and whatnot. We're just going to do that instead. And, this wasn't an uncommon sort of proposal at the time. Like, people forget, I think it was Bob Dole ran in 1996, ran on a platform that included a death penalty for drug offender, for drug dealers. The idea that Joe Biden was somehow way out on the extreme of mass incarceration is simply not true. Now, and that speaks to the work that advocates have done since then, moving the needle on this issue to the idea that, like what we have in Oregon, thanks to the citizen ballot initiative that just passed, of decriminalizing all drugs and saying, okay, instead of throwing people in jail, we're going to help you with recovery and get you clean. Like, that's a much better investment of time than building prisons. And then the last piece of this is something like, a massive, I don't know the exact percentages, but the number of people who are in state prisons and jails for drug offenses, state and local prisons and jails, outnumbers the people in federal incarceration for the same crimes by orders of magnitude. As far as drugs, we're talking something like fewer than 100,000 total in federal are in federal prisons and jails for that. But in states, we're talking 200,000 just for drugs in states, and then another 150,000 in local jails in states. And so it's this much smaller chunk of the total number of people who are incarcerated, who are in jail for, or who are in federal prison and jail, that the president himself has the power to do anything about. This needs to happen at the local level. It needs to happen at the state level. So if it's something that you're interested in, get out there and advocate on it, because it's something that you can make a big difference at locally and at the state level.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's definitely been an obsession in the U.S. and different places have had it worse than others. But being in this punitive society where it's we're going to punish you for doing this versus looking at the treatment and rehabilitation of those who were users thereof and helping them to reacclimate to society even after they leave jail in the first place, which increases their recidivism into that if they're not recovered or if they don't have the tools to actually survive in the world as as a what is it? Isn't that a phrase in particular, like if you're a contributing member of society or whatever that phrase is, your normal contributing upstanding member of society, whatever you want to call it. But the tools that we give to folks that are coming out, like that, it's a huge gap that's sitting there. And the First Step Act helped to address a few of those, but you were talking, it says it's first step for a goddamn reason. If you take a look at it, it's the first step. It is such a small step at that, and there's so much more that needs to be done. But if you notice that after that was done, you didn't see Trump advocating for, oh, we need more. You didn't see him saying, oh, well, now that we've done the first step, let's get the next part on that side. Okay, how can we start addressing some of these issues that were there? That's not something you see in his stump speeches. That's not something you see him advocating for.
It's part of Biden's platform, I believe, to at least decriminalize marijuana and expunge marijuana records. There's so many knock-on effects of the war on drugs. Like if you have a conviction for marijuana, that comes up in a job application, whether you have criminal convictions. And as a teacher who taught middle school in a inner city type situation, children at that age being recruited to sell drugs, and it's a monstrous failure, and it causes a lot of evil. In this country. And
go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that on that exact same point, like the affecting of their record, it's more than just like getting a job, as you were saying. Like that's that box that have you ever had a conviction for XYZ, that type of thing. That's already a stressful thing that can lead you to missing that job. But it also prohibited you from getting access to federal funds for your schooling in the first place. For example, that is one of the questions on the FAFSA application, for example. So it's like if you're trying to better yourself, you had a pass or whatever else, or you got caught with a gram or whatever the fuck, and you took care of that and whatever else, and now you're here, you're about to pot at college, and you're trying to get some financial aid because you don't have you don't have a father to give you a few $1 million like a Trump or someone else would. You got to apply for some aid to get this taken care of, and then that question pops up. Well, guess what? You're not eligible for aid. So we wish you the best of luck, but like that's the kind of hindrance that it can have.
It's basically thoughts and prayers is what is a lot of, like, well, we're not going to take any concrete steps here. And I will say one of the sponsors of the First Step Act was Cory Booker, who is my senator. Literally like the week or two after signing the First Step Act, Cory Booker had introduced a bill called the Next Step Act. And where did it go? Nowhere, because Donald Trump didn't actually care. It was entirely a messaging win. And he then pivoted to, this law and order message. And, we should be locking people up for, painting statues or for burning the American flag or kneeling at a football game is what we should be locking people up for. That's like, I doubt for some reason, give me some rope here. I doubt his commitment to criminal justice reform when he wants to lock people up for, insulting the magic cloth that makes Jesus like America, right? Like that's what we're talking about here. So give me a break.
The guy had no concept of what our First Amendment rights were about. Why we were allowed to burn the flag, because it is just a fucking piece of cloth and it's a violation of freedom of speech and everything. We're not supposed to honor, we're not supposed to be required forcibly to honor these things. And I was amazed that Trump didn't understand any of that. But on the thing about marijuana, I just wanted to make a mention. I used to live in Arizona. Arizona was a zero tolerance state. You can carry weapons all over the place. Before you could in any other state, you could carry a sidearm. I could carry my sword. I could carry a gun. Didn't matter. Anywhere you go, except for a courthouse or a bank, you can carry your weapons. But you couldn't have any marijuana at all. I mean, there was a guy in my neighborhood who went to prison for 3 years because the cops pulled him over and found a resonated bowl in his car. A resonated bowl was a felony offense. Paraphernalia, it was a 3-year prison term, which of course is a black mark on your record forever. Mm-hmm. Right? Well, as a result of this election, Arizona, of all places, has decriminalized marijuana. That's amazing. I say this as somebody that marijuana could be legal everywhere. I wouldn't be taking it. I'm not about my use of marijuana. I don't personally like marijuana, so I don't do it. But I understand that the best way to win the war on drugs is to give up. Because if the United States, if every state legalized marijuana, what would happen to the Mexican drug cartels? They wouldn't exist. We would get so much revenue from the marijuana sales, and that the buyers of marijuana now have government federal regulations on the quality of the weed that they buy. Mm-hmm. So that everybody wins. And look at every state that has done this so far has gotten a huge amount of revenue from it. There's just absolutely no reason to have criminalized marijuana anymore. There was never a reason. It was always intended to target black and brown people, and that was the whole purpose for it.
It's discriminatory in enforcement as well. Like someone like Trump, I don't know, he's never been convicted, right, of drugs, but he seems like, I bet. But anyways, he could, if you're some college kid and you get caught with it, some white college kid, I'll say it, your chance of being convicted of that are less than other racial minorities.
You can still, if you're a white college kid, you can still smoke marijuana and become president as long as you never inhale.
Yeah.
Or even if you really like beer, you really like beer, you can become a justice.
As long as you keep your calendar for 40 years.
Those calendars.
Do you have a beer calendar?
Well, you have to get all those parties on there, as you do as a high school student, like kegger at Ski's house and Donkey Dong Doug or whatever.
So I got another chat that I've got to read. Quote Master $5. How do you think Kamala Harris will perform as vice president? How would she do if she had to step up as president? There's this whole thing about your level of incompetence. That's a possibility. I don't know. I thought she was brilliant as a senator. Have you seen how she grills people? As a senator, she was astounding. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, she's not Sarah Palin, so
again, a low bar to clear. But
I'm about to say that's one heck of a bar.
No, I mean,
she's run for office, like, I don't know, she's been in public office for 15, 20 years now. She's representing, she's still representing, the largest state in the union. She's done a pretty good job for herself. I mean, she's raised her profile. And, she'll have the same amount of experience that Barack Obama had at the national level when he was elected to some extent. So
yeah,
I have absolutely no apprehension about Kamala Harris as if something happens to Joe Biden because he's as old as dirt, and so she becomes president. I've no worries about that. I mean, look what we just came through.
talking about low bars here.
Well, with Kamala, she has made mistakes in the past, and because she had so much power, those mistakes crushed a lot of people's lives. Mm-hmm. So, but she seems remorseful, and she seems willing to fix those things. And also, I would give her a chance.
I would have given Donald Trump a chance. I mean, because everybody said, give Donald Trump a chance. Remember that back?
I remember that. That was
Yeah.
all over the place.
There was a time when Trump had done something incredibly stupid. All the news is reporting that Trump had done something incredibly stupid, and I don't know why. On my naivete, I thought that when Trump comes to this podium, that he was going to admit. I wish I could remember the specifics. I really thought that he was going to admit that, yeah, that was a stupid thing to do. I should have analyzed this better. This is what I actually thought. Everybody else on the planet would have done this. They would have owned the mistake, admitted it, asked for forgiveness, and promised a correction. And he didn't. And it's not like you could save it. He just, you know how he does. He just lies and expects us to believe it. Or does the what about thing, or just the displacement. No, I don't take responsibility at all. Yeah, I take full responsibility, but somebody's got to do Antifa, right? So we got to do a deflection. I was going to give him a chance. I thought he was going to make the apology every human being would make. He didn't. Yeah, I have full confidence that Biden would, Kamala would.
The pivot is coming. We're telling you, like I just read that his pivot is coming, and he's going to sound presidential for the last 72 days of his presidency.
Yeah, that's all it takes.
That big change.
Yeah, right, exactly. He doesn't have to worry.
He's going to come. He's going to sound presidential.
I mean, this is so much of the conceit of what he could have run on, and what he kind of intimated toward was, I'm not like the other Republicans. I don't want to cut Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. I want to make your healthcare better. He took the stuff that was, and he actually also said, I want to raise taxes on the hedge fund people. I mean, look back to his campaign and look at the polling around, the perceptions of liberal versus conservative of the two candidates in 2016. People perceived Hillary Clinton as really liberal and perceived Donald Trump as much closer to the median voter.
I have a question for the panel, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
My wife and I were talking about this, and I'm trying to convince other people in my family that Donald Trump was threatening Social Security. What does the panel have to say about that?
I mean, as president, yeah, absolutely.
Yes or no? Did he actually do that?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean the thing where the payroll tax holiday. I mean,
the FICA tax.
Basically saying, okay, we're not going to collect it. I mean, like that's how we fund Social Security. Now, the thing is, this is an example of one of those times where the left, quote unquote, socialism has won the conversation, where most Republicans now realize that actively campaigning on privatizing Social Security is catastrophically bad, and they will not generally win elections. They won't come out and say it in that way. So they do things like private-public partnerships, or we want to voucherize it, or give you some control. They use like these weird head fakes about it, but they don't come out and say it anymore because the American people think that by and large Social Security is a pretty good program. They think Medicare is a pretty good program. They think Medicaid is a pretty good program.
And Obamacare has become that.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so, what Donald Trump did is sort of say, hey, populism, this kind of, his type of populism is kind of scary populism, but populism in the term of, we're not going to cut social services to the bone. Like, that's what he ran on. But then when he came into office, he governed like a not normal, but he governed like a idiosyncratic, but, right down the line, a very conservative Republican, a traditional conservative Republican, cutting these sort of benefits and trying to privatize stuff. And, it's hugely unpopular. And it's part of the reason why I think some people looked at him and said, especially in the upper Midwest, and said, we're not any better now. He didn't actually listen to us. And it does, and this is a risk, I think, for Democrats, is having a more kind of genuinely populist right-wing figure come in and drop and ditch some of the unpopular parts of the Republican platform on privatizing Social Security and, the answer to everything is a tax cut for rich people. If somebody were to come in and really weaponize racism in the way that Donald Trump did, and xenophobia and all sorts of other, phobias and isms, but couple it with the type of economic populism and protectionism that Donald Trump articulated on the campaign trail, that's where things start to get a little scary, and where we've seen some success from right-wing populists abroad. But there's a broader consensus in most of those countries abroad on social safety net programs. And the question then becomes, are we going to hold on to those social safety net programs for us, the good people, and keep out those bad immigrants, right? Like that's typically how it's framed.
I agree. I agree that Social Security is popular, but we live in so much misinformation and disinformation now. It's like Phil was saying, the Trump campaign sent out emails that the Democrats were going to cut their Medicare and Social Security. Like they project what they're doing onto their opponents, and their constituents are so shielded and so resistant to getting information from anyone but their authorities. They believe but it's not true.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating.
So
absolutely non-curious. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Juhem.
No, I was going to add something to what Nate was saying, in the sense that one of the analysis of why Republicans, particularly Senate Republicans, close ranks. Sorry, it's getting late. Close ranks with Donald Trump is in the essence that he didn't do anything that he said he was going to do. Like, he literally governed like a regular Republican with like an eccentric regular Republican, but he didn't do anything policy-wise that would have actually challenged the party in any sense that he would have any pushback. So in that sense, like, the Republican Party won.
The Republican Party moved to him, or he moved into the Republican Party. He took over parts of it, but reforming that fundamental question about the role of government in certain social safety net programs, no.
And that's it comes with him not being able or even expecting to actually govern. And so a lot of those policies and things that he signed were given to him and say, hey, these are going to help your people, sign it. And of course, for him, he just wants the photo op of putting his signature on it and then waving it around like he's reading to a kindergarten class to say, like, here are the pictures, just kind of showing his signature. But like, as Lily was saying, when he cut the FICA tax, that payroll tax on that site, he didn't say that, we're going to take away the Social Security and Medicare aspect of your paycheck. It was, we're going to give some of this money back to you. We're going to give, we're going to empower you to, help you during this pandemic. It would never cross his mind to say that it would affect potentially Social Security, because he also said that he wanted to continue it if he were to get reelected, to continue it into the next year, which would have had catastrophic effect. I'm getting hungry, so I'm going to change my background to make.
Wait,
to
did
make
you say
better?
Catastrophic?
That is funny. But yeah, it's such an interesting thing, because as Juhem was just saying, he didn't govern. I mean, that wasn't what he liked. The bluster and the cheers, especially. He loved the cheers on that side, but had no real interest in the governing aspect. All the reading security briefs, just one page, maybe, back and forth, and hopefully they'll put his name on it so he'll pay attention a little more.
You have to have a picture and his name. Those are the two things that they literally said, we have to make sure his name is in it so he stays interested through a 2-page front and back briefing. We have to make sure, like, blah, 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 this terrorist threat in Dubai, where you have a lovely hotel, Donald. That's what we're talking about, which is crazy.
Minus some of his eccentricism, as you have put it, he was essentially the perfect rubber stamp. Like, they can give him whatever they'd want to and just preface it by saying, this is going to help your base. You'll be able to claim to your base that you got a victory. Boom. Like, that's all he needed. He needed no more details. I'm sure he probably didn't even care about more details about how it was going to get there or who was going to be administering with the thing. It's just something he could take to the stump speech and get cheers and accolades for that. I really did this for you. Yeah, I did it, y'all. That type of thing.
I mean, look at healthcare, right? He said, Obamacare is a disaster. We're going to fix it. Okay.
Repeal and replace.
Years on. What does that mean? Like, well, we're going to make it so the plans are more affordable. Okay. That would require an additional expenditure of money, which is exactly what your party in Congress refused to do. Okay. Yeah. Like, I mean, because that if you ask people, okay, what don't you like about the Affordable Care Act? They'll say the deductibles are too high, the premiums are too high, and the benefits aren't generous enough. Okay, well, what is the solution to that? Well, the solution is giving people more money and making it cheaper, or putting in place plans that are more affordable. And in order to do that, you either need to raise taxes or deficit spend. And the problem is that the Republican folks said, we're not going to do that under the Affordable Care Act. And, it has to be revenue neutral and blah, 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 like all that stuff. And so like the things that people are upset about the Affordable Care Act are precisely what the Trump administration and Republicans in Congress for now a decade have said they're going to do the opposite of. And so if the president had come into office after saying, I'm going to make your healthcare better, and had said, here's what we're going to do is we're going to take Obamacare, we're going to brand it as Trump Care, and we're going to give away a bunch of money to you. We're going to, give you $300 a month to help pay for this. It would have been a huge policy win for him. People would have been like, oh my God, Trump Care is so much better. I'm paying so much less money for these policies. I'm so much happier with this. And it would have been an unmitigated win for him. And by the way, it would have been great for the American people.
And Democrats would have gone with it.
And Democrats would have been like, oh, okay, yeah, great, sure. because
I need some help.
People go to Congress. Democrats go into Congress with the idea that the government policy can affect people's lives, and are like passionate about giving people health care, right? Like that was why a ton of people who were in Congress from like 2006 to 2012, Democrats, that's why they were there, was because they thought, we really need to do health care. And that's why a lot of Democrats from 2018 are there, is that next step from Obamacare to something else, right? And like, so there are a bunch of ideas there. On the Republican side, there just aren't those ideas. Nobody is sitting around in Republican land thinking, how can we deliver better health care that costs less money, that everybody likes and covers everybody? Well, you don't let the government be run as a corporate oligarchy wherein the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies run everything. That's the solution. Well, but that's not what the Republicans say. I mean, the Republicans say we need to do less regulation of insurance companies. I mean, that was the whole part of ACA. Whatever the dumb acronym.
American
Healthcare Act, ACA, AHCA. Yeah. I couldn't remember if it was ACHA or AHA.
Yeah.
And like that's what it did. Is it increased prices for people. So the Affordable Care Act requires what's called age banding, meaning that you can only charge people who are older up to 3 times as much or something like that as somebody who's at the youngest end of the age band. The ACA would have extended that to, I think it was 7 times more. So like young people would have been paying less, but old people would have been priced out of the market. So young people, if we did an NHS, then somebody in the chat earlier was talking about how they didn't want to pay taxes for anything that didn't directly affect them. Right. So young people have to pay to the national healthcare system. They have to pay every month or every year in their taxes. They have to pay this slight adjustment when they don't go to the doctor very often. Right. But then when they're old, now they're saving a ton. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't make any sense why we wouldn't do an NHS system, especially since we know that insurance companies, we know that the libertarians are absolutely wrong about the morality of the free market, and the corporations are going to do the right thing, because that's never happened.
What's their incentive? Anyway, continue.
Exactly. That's not going to happen. They're going to try to screw you every way they can. They're going to deny you coverage every way they can. So this is how they make money. The NHS becomes the best way to do this. Yeah. I mean, look at Medicare. Like, people are happy with Medicare. People who have Medicare are happy with Medicare. Hell, people who have Medicaid are happy with Medicaid, because and like the knock-on effects of having healthcare coverage extend even further. It's shown to be a massive reduction in stress, even for people who are at the lowest income level, because they're eligible for Medicaid. just the ability for them to access preventative care and go to the doctor with no copays or very low costs, like it improves their mental health like a massive amount. Just the ability for them to go to the doctor. People who participate in what we would call like an NHS style system, which is the Department of the Veterans Affairs. Like there are some problems there, but a lot of it has to do with funding, and because it's a very limited like group of people, and so you have like limited access, you have limited numbers of hospitals and whatnot. Like there are lots of options out there for providing people and making sure that everybody is covered and has access to healthcare, and different ways that you can implement the system. The great thing, American Atheists, is not going to take a position on which healthcare plan is the right one. What we're going to say is you don't get religious exemptions. Everybody, if whatever you're doing, no religious exemptions from it, fine, whatever. But from just like a messaging standpoint, the idea of Medicare for all, of just saying, listen, everybody, it's covered. You don't have to worry about it. Like, it's a very powerful message, because it's a lot harder to explain to people, the more complicated version that Joe Biden has run on, except to say public option. People understand public option. But saying, we're going to reduce the cost for people who are making between 250 and 400% of the federal poverty line. We're going to increase your subsidy so you're not paying more than 7% of your annual income, or 7% of your monthly income in premiums plus deductibles. And so we're going to give you a tax credit. Like, all that stuff, people's eyes just glaze over. They want as little friction as possible at the point of service. Now, ways to do that, there are a lot of ways you can get there. But again, if you're talking about values, and that's I think how we have to communicate this question and communicate these issues, is to communicate them on a values perspective. And if the value is people should be able to have healthcare and not worry about going bankrupt and dying if they get sick, how do we best do that?
And if we did the national healthcare system, it would also benefit, like what people are concerned with the VA, right? That it's underfunded and it's underperforming, and it seems like it's designed to do that for whatever reason, because we want to screw our veterans somehow. Why would we even set up a system like that? But if we did an NHS, of course, that would cover the veterans too, and everybody's going to demand that we have a certain quality, which of course is going to apply to the veterans too. I just don't understand why we don't. I do understand why we don't do it, because the insurance companies have a hold of us by the short hairs.
You have.
I want to bow out. I just realized what time it is.
Okay.
It is midnight. Yes.
Yeah, it's been fun, but yeah. Good night.
You're
everybody.
always the first one to leave, aren't you?
This
Of course,
guy.
I'm the only one with a toddler at home.
I was going to say, he's the only one who has someone who's going to wake him up at like 6 a.m, I bet.
Yeah.
Juhem, thank you very, very much for being on. Really happy to have you. And we have been over 3 hours. We're going to have to close it sometime, and I'd rather not just keep going forever. So I want to.
Certainly not forever.
I want to.
That's a bigger commitment that I'm willing to buy in for.
Yeah.
Nick, again, thank you. I know Phil.
Yeah.
Phil's got endurance.
Oh my goodness.
But Nick and Juhem, thank you very, very much for being a part of the show. I really enjoyed everything I heard tonight.
I learned things.
Yeah. And the reason that I asked you the question about Social Security is so that I can point people in my family to the hour mark of 2:56. so I can show you that this isn't just something I came up with.
Well, have a good night, all.
Thanks,
Take
everybody.
care.
Bye.
Good night, Juhem.
Bye.
Good night, you.
Yeah.
Yep. Everybody say good night.
Yeah.
Good night.